Halloween is meant to be a time to gather with friends and enjoy some playful festivities. You might dress up as a lovely girl, a mischievous character, or a cheerful persona. It's not something you'd expect to encounter a real-life monster. Now, onto the story for today. Chelsea Allen Bruck was born January 28, 1992, in Trenton, Michigan, to her mother Leonda and her father Matthew Bruck. Leonda was a banker, and Chelsea's father Matt was a farmer. Chelsea was the youngest of 5 children. She had 3 sisters, Jennifer, Cassandra, and Megan, and a brother Nathaniel. She was very close to her sister Cassandra because she was only 2 years older than her. But all of the Bruck siblings were very close. Chelsea loved being one of the Bruck girls. They all grew up on a family farm in a very small town called Maybee, and the community had an estimated population of only 556 people. It's another small town case for today. This could actually be the smallest town that I have talked about so far. It's actually called the village of Maybee in Exeter Township. I wondered what the brown jug was because that was predominantly displayed on Google Maps. Well, it's literally just a bar and grill. It's nothing fancy at all, but for this tiny village, it was most likely the spot. They're proudly serving flatbread pizza. Just like in most of these small towns, I see a cemetery, a post office, a Dollar General, and they're even showcasing their water tower on Google Maps. The water tower, those are the most important places to be seen on this bird's eye view. Other than that, there's just a lot of green on this map, but there is something charming about this town though. Look at that little post office. I bet there is never a line in there, not like the ones here in LA. If you have to mail something out, yeah, it's gonna take you all day. You're gonna have to take a day off just to get something mailed out in LA. But here in the village of Maybee, it's so cozy it doesn't even look real. It looks like a little town in Beetlejuice. I mean, that exact post office does not look real to me, but it really is. And this is where Chelsea grew up, surrounded by a community that knew each other. They attended church regularly, and she was brought up with certain morals and values and a certain lifestyle. There's just so much of the world that she hadn't seen yet. The Bruck's house was a 4th-generation farmhouse. Matt and Leonda were raising their son and their 4 daughters on a 160-acre farm that was started by Matt's great-grandfather in 1875. Matt and his wife had farmed for years. It was all they knew. It was what they believed in, and it was what they were passing down to their children, just like their family had passed it down to them. Their farm sat on a dirt road just outside of town. The Maybee downtown area was just 2 blocks long, that's it. And here's the welcome sign. It says, "Welcome to Maybee, the best little town in Michigan." To get an understanding of Chelsea and her upbringing, I want to tell you where she went to school. She attended St. Patrick's School for elementary studies. Their website says it's a Christ-centered, spirit-filled, solid Christian community. Students are immersed in scriptures, and the curriculum is based upon their faith. Students encounter Jesus Christ in every class, every day. Students are taught the Catholic doctrine in an atmosphere that reflects love, care, and respect for the uniqueness of each person. The teachers are dedicated to teaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. These values are woven throughout the entire curriculum and acted upon through many opportunities for Christian service. This is what Chelsea was immersed in. This is where Chelsea got her values for community, for others, and the respect for herself. For high school, Chelsea attended Monroe Public High School, which was much bigger, with an emphasis on sports like football, cheerleading, as well as marching band. It seems like a pretty ordinary high school with the usual characteristics and the things that a teen or someone in high school would find to be important and fun, especially during those transformative years of their life. After graduating, Chelsea and her sister Cassandra continued living on the farm with their parents. The other Bruck siblings had already left home, gotten married, or both. Chelsea loved baking, she had a passion for it, and she hoped that one day she could attend culinary school and become a chef. However, she was content finding a secure job close to home at a restaurant called Olga's Kitchen. There, she enjoyed welcoming patrons as a hostess. Chelsea was a good girl growing up, and she evolved into a very innocent, happy, kind, and beautiful woman. Her life was just beginning when tragedy struck. It's so important for me to paint the most accurate picture that I possibly can about who Chelsea was as a person, because it helps to piece together the story later. So remember these details. One thing that I found to be important for me to learn about Chelsea is that she still relied on her parents a lot. By the time she was 22 years old, she didn't even have a driver's license or a car. But she didn't feel like she wanted or needed them, because her parents were more than happy to drive her anywhere that she needed to be, mostly to and from work at Olga's Kitchen. It's a chain restaurant with a Mediterranean menu. They have flatbread sandwiches, salads, and it's in a sleek, bright atmosphere. It kind of reminds me of Chipotle for Mediterranean food. The area that Olga's Kitchen was located in was a little more happening than where Chelsea lived. It was in Monroe County, which is about 15 minutes away from the farm. This area had all of the fun fast food places, shopping like the Mall of Monroe, movie theaters, Walmart, things like that. So it was bound to open her up to more about life, and especially new people. As a matter of fact, by the time she was 22, Chelsea's closest friends were the ones that she met while she was working the past 4 years at Olga's. They hung out all the time and were very close. 3 of those friends were Becky Brunson, Heather Brooks, and Laura Taylor. Being friends with a girl like Chelsea meant that you had someone to watch movies with, especially musicals. She loved musicals. Being around Chelsea meant listening to music. One band in particular, Queen, was her favorite band. She loved playing video games, including Final Fantasy, and her favorite TV show was also one of mine, Doctor Who. Chelsea also enjoyed reading and loving on her cat and her dog. She just sounds like such a sweet person, and she really was. Actually, many of the people that knew her said that they loved being around her because of her positive outlook on life. She had a fun side too, though. Not rebellious in any way, but fun. She liked putting pink streaks in her blonde hair and getting a small anchor tattooed on her neck behind her ear. But why would a small-town girl get something nautical like an anchor? She's 5 feet 7 inches, she's got green eyes, short, straight blonde hair, and a beautiful smile. Chelsea really enjoyed socializing. She liked going to parties. There was one party that the girls were really looking forward to. They had been literally talking about it and planning it all summer long. It was an annual Halloween party hosted by the lead singer of a Detroit rock band. His name is Mike Williams, but most people know him as Big Mike Pickaxe Preacher. That's his band, and the music is described as aggressive, in-your-face thrash music. The 31-year-old lead singer from Frenchtown Township had been throwing these annual Halloween bashes since he was in high school. Because of his band's presence in Michigan and beyond, the parties were more like concerts, and they had grown from little house parties to full-on events, entertaining upward of 800 to 1,000 people from all over the state and even neighboring states. In 2014, Mike was planning his biggest party yet. It was being held at his mother's farmland out in Newport Township, Michigan, which is about 15 minutes away from Olga's Kitchen and about a 30-minute drive from the town of Maybee. This was the event of the year. It was also the 10th anniversary, so it was going to have it all. There were about 8 to 10 bands that were going to be playing, so at least 10 hours of live musical entertainment, lots of fun new people to meet, a costume party, and more. Chelsea loved being creative. She didn't just want to dress up, she wanted to dress up to win the costume contest. Chelsea and her friends had actually attended 2 of Mike's previous Halloween parties, and they loved it, so they pretty much knew what to expect and were looking forward to it so much. Becky and Chelsea decided that they were going to go as Batman villains. Chelsea chose the beautiful Poison Ivy, a character from the DC Comics who was played by Uma Thurman in the Batman and Robin movie. Here are some photos. It kind of speaks for itself. When you hear Poison Ivy, you kind of know you're going to have ivy covered all over the body. Chelsea was making a costume that emulates that look. Chelsea had the idea to take an ordinary green leotard and turn it into an ivy-covered one-piece. Instead of buying something, Chelsea painstakingly sewed her own creation. One by one, she hand-sewed each piece of fake ivy onto her leotard. She took pictures of her handiwork and shared them with friends along the way. Almost every night after work, Chelsea would sit in front of the TV and sew until she got tired and went to bed. This outfit was 6 weeks in the making, and when it was finally done, it was awesome. It was like a high-quality piece, something that you would probably find on a place like Etsy. Totally handmade, and it looked awesome on Chelsea. She decided she would wear it over a pair of green leggings, and she wanted to wear red shoes, but they were definitely going to have to be flats because there was going to be a lot of dirt, grass, and cornfields to walk through. That is no place for heels. Chelsea got a glass jug, and she labeled it poison. This is what she planned to bring her red wine in. It was a practical prop. She didn't have to carry around a cup, and instead, she would drink right out of her own poison bottle and stay in character all night long. She might even win a prize for the most creative outfit. There was so much to look forward to, and before the girls knew it, the night was finally there. Saturday, October 25th, 2014. Laura planned to drive. Chelsea didn't plan on going all the way back home that night since she didn't drive, so she planned on spending the night with a friend. She packed an overnight bag and brought it with her into Laura's car, along with a small change purse, and of course, her cell phone. The girls arrived at the party at approximately 10 p.m., which is fairly early. But even by then, there were hundreds of people there. As they pulled up, everything was so organized. There was a dedicated parking lot, security guards guiding traffic, and directing people to 2 large tents that had been set up. There were a bunch of food trucks, bars, porta potties, fire twirling, a 40-foot bonfire, and prizes for the best costume. Of course, there was a stage, and among the bands were Psychopathic Days, Armageddon Awaits, and Everything Must Die. Mike seemed to have thought of everything, and the excitement was palpable. After parking, the girls made their way to the excitement. That's when Chelsea had to make a decision, to bring or not to bring her phone with her. Poison Ivy didn't exactly need pockets, so her outfit didn't have them. She was already holding a large glass jug and was with friends who had their phones, so she opted out of taking hers. She left it behind with her belongings in Laura's vehicle, and they proceeded to make their way to the party. As you can probably imagine, it was organized chaos. Apparently, someone had taken it upon themselves to post this invitation publicly on Facebook, and it pretty much went viral. Mike was not expecting this many people to show up, but the more, the merrier. After all, it was more exposure for his band, and the music was the main attraction. Mike's band was on stage, dressed as Ninja Turtles, and hundreds of people were there drinking, smoking, and doing drugs. Nothing was off limits when you were in disguise. You could hardly tell who anyone was. But the girls did know about 15 to 20 people that were attending that night. The fun began as soon as they walked up. The music, the decorations, the costumes. There were other things about the night that kind of went unnoticed, though. It was pitch black outside those lighted tents. There was land as far as the eye could see, and even beyond. Anyone could get lost out there. By midnight, there were close to 1,000 people coming and going. Strangers were everywhere. The girls were definitely having the time of their lives, and Chelsea was pretty intoxicated, which was to be expected. She met up with another friend, Penny Renee Watkins, as well as Penny's sister and another girl named Heather Brooks. Becky was there too. Penny and Chelsea were very good friends. They were attached at the hip the entire party. Even though Penny was a decade older than Chelsea and had kids of her own, she felt like, when she was with Chelsea, she could let loose and be goofy. They acted like little schoolgirls. Here's a picture of Chelsea with Penny and some other friends at the party that night. They looked so happy. But around 12:45, as she and Penny were making their way to a huge bonfire that had flames 15 to 20 feet in the air, with tons of people gathered around in front of it, something happened to Chelsea that she wasn't expecting. Chelsea let out a subtle scream, holding her face in pain. Poor Chelsea had run into a wooden post face first. She ended up getting a gash on her forehead and the bridge of her nose. It was pretty bad. She was bleeding. She was in shock and wanted to leave. Penny, being motherly, calmed her down and persuaded her to stay. "It's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. We'll just have a drink, and then we'll go in a little bit," she said. Chelsea kind of had no choice. She couldn't leave since she was relying on someone else for a ride. Chelsea had a drink, and so did Penny. During that time, they became separated. Penny was riding with her sister, who had to go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, so she had to leave. She couldn't reach out to Chelsea to give her a heads up because she didn't have her phone. She thought it was fine. She knew Chelsea was getting a ride from Laura, so she left. Speaking of which, Chelsea wanted to check in with Laura. They had also been separated in the crowd, and she wanted to see where she was and when they could leave. Chelsea was walking around asking random strangers if she could use their phone to call her friend. Finally, some guy saw her crying and let her use his phone. Apparently, Laura had looked for Chelsea and couldn't find her either. She couldn't reach her since Laura had Chelsea's phone with her, so she went looking and found Becky. She told Becky, "Look, I've got to go, but I have all of Chelsea's things, including her phone. Can you take it with you? Then when you see her, can you give them to her?" Becky said sure. Now Becky was roaming around in a sea of people, over all the noise and commotion, trying to locate Chelsea, but she couldn't find her either. Chelsea was continuing to search for her friends, or actually for anyone she knew who could possibly give her a ride home. Now completely separated from all of her friends, she was frantically asking different strangers if she could use their phone to figure out what to do and how to make it back home that night. That must have been rough. It's hard enough to organize a plan when you're sober, but now intoxicated, alone, and surrounded by hundreds of other intoxicated people, Chelsea finally made her way to the parking area and searched for anyone she knew who could help her out. Becky had already left at this point with all of Chelsea's things, including her cell phone. "I can't be without my phone. It's like my lifeline," she thought. There was just this helpless feeling of not having a connection to people, or GPS or anything. Around 2:45 in the morning, Chelsea was out by a gravel road near the parking area looking for people that were leaving. She was trying to see if she could hitch a ride with someone, waving at people as they were driving up to pick up other people or walking to their cars. There had to be someone willing to help her. The girls had attended Mike's parties before. They were always safe. No one was worried. Laura and Becky knew that a ton of their other friends were at the party, and Chelsea had been hanging out with several of them throughout the night. They were positive that she was going to be just fine, but she wasn't. The day after Mike's party was a Sunday, a day of rest. Everyone that attended was going to need it, and none of the girls in the group made any plans for Sunday because they knew they'd probably be hungover. When Becky was finally up and making it through her day, she called Chelsea's mom to let her know that she had Chelsea's things, including her phone. So, whenever Chelsea wanted to, she could have her mom or dad drive over to retrieve them. Becky didn't get an answer. The call went to voicemail, and she left a message. Then she just went on about her day, trying to nurse her hangover. Becky did not hear back from Chelsea's mom at all, but later that night, she got a Facebook message from Chelsea's older sister, Cassandra. This is when things take a turn for the girls. It's when regret starts to sink in. It's when they begin to question everything, maybe even what kind of friends they are. Cassandra lets Becky know that Chelsea never came home last night, which wasn't that much of a surprise since she'd been planning to stay out. But they still hadn't heard from her, and it was getting late. Becky wasn't worried at first. She sent a message back saying, "Well, she's probably at a friend's house. Maybe she's just really hungover. You never know, she could have fallen asleep, gotten up for a minute, eaten something, gone back to bed and repeated that. Who knows?" But someone does know. Someone knows what happened to Chelsea, but no one close to her does. On Monday morning, when Chelsea didn't show up back at home or even reach out to anyone in her family, they became very concerned. Cassandra and her mom called everyone that knew Chelsea, everyone they knew she would be hanging out with or going to this party with that night, asking if they had any idea where she was. No one knew. She had not gotten into contact with anyone, and this was out of character for Chelsea. The Bruck had the type of family that sat down for dinners every night, and they kept in touch with each other several times throughout the day. On a normal day, they were always in touch with one another. Cassandra and Chelsea were very close, so at this point, they didn't hesitate. They decided to call the Monroe County Sheriff's Department and report Chelsea missing. The Monroe County Sheriff's Office is pretty much between Maybee and Newport, where the party was. So between Chelsea's house and where the Halloween party took place. The party is well known. Even people at the police station know about Big Mike and his parties. So they were gathering all of this information from Chelsea's sister and her mom in order to figure out where the police should start looking and whether or not they should even be concerned. At this point, we're talking about a 22-year-old woman. She's free to do whatever she wants. She doesn't have to have her phone. She doesn't have to use her phone. She doesn't have to call anyone. She could just be at someone's house. Maybe she didn't want to reach out to anyone. Maybe she met someone and was having a fun time. Who knows? But her family knows her well enough to know that this isn't like her. It's the opposite of the character that Chelsea was playing that night. She's not like Poison Ivy. She's quiet, shy, reserved, but most of all, she's responsible. The date is now October 27th, just a few days before Halloween, and this is this family's worst nightmare. Meanwhile, friends are reaching out to Mike via Facebook, asking if he knew anything about Chelsea going missing, or knew anything about Chelsea, or where she was. Anything. And he really didn't know who they were talking about. It's not like he and Chelsea were friends. Yes, she had attended his parties before, but they did not hang out together, and there were literally 1,000 people at his party. Year after year, hundreds and hundreds of people showed up. So no, he had no idea who Chelsea was or where she was. The more time that passed, the more messages Mike was getting. People were even asking him to walk around his mother's farm. I mean, we're talking acres of land, and he was sort of like, "What do you want me to be looking for?" But I don't think it's that uncalled for. You have individuals who were intoxicated. Would it be that strange if someone passed out in a field? Her friends and family didn't think so. They wanted him to comb that area. So that Monday, he took his dog and went walking. He was pretty much hiking at this point, going through the farm for at least a couple of miles looking around. Meanwhile, guess who's literally meeting up on that property with him? Chelsea's mom and her sister and friends. They actually come to the farm to look for themselves. They were proactive. They were on it from the get-go. They were not going to let a minute go by without doing something to find their loved one. So they just came right onto his property, and Mike really wasn't that happy, and neither was Chelsea's mom, both for different reasons. When Mike was out with his dog ran into a fox trap and was injured very badly. So he is carrying his dog back to the house while Chelsea's mom is coming to the house, trying to look for her daughter. So both of these people are concerned about their children, Mike's fur baby and Leanda's real human child. This interaction wasn't really that great. They were both on edge. Leanda just wants answers. She seems mad at Mike. I mean, after all, yes, it was his party. So is he responsible for her going missing? A lot of people seem to think so. If he wouldn't have had this party, then this wouldn't have happened, right? Another thing Leanda said was that if she had known this was a party with hundreds of people, upward of 800 to 1,000, she wouldn't have let her daughter go. Those were her words. She actually did interviews because the media picked up on this case immediately.
Had I known she was going to a party with over 600 people, 22 or not, she would not have been going.
This small town was rocked by the news. It was huge. Nothing like this had happened before. Chelsea's sister and mom would stop and talk to anyone that would listen. They wanted to get the word out. Mike went and took his dog to the vet, and when he came back to his farm, there were at least 20 people standing at his doorstep, basically asking to search through his fields. He wasn't exactly going to say no, but at the same time, he didn't feel like he'd done anything wrong. He wasn't going to ask Chelsea's family to leave because this was very emotional, and you could tell it was a serious situation, even though the cops weren't there yet. At this moment, he allowed basically anyone onto his property to search. That's going to come later when the police go out there and search. I'll tell you what they used and what they did and what their methods were. But they spent the rest of Monday planning what they were going to do next. Tuesday, the police wanted to talk to anyone who knew Chelsea and anyone they could find that was at this party. And they needed to do it fast. People came into town for this party, and then they went back home, some of them to different states. So they didn't even know if they were going to find anyone who remembered seeing Chelsea. And not only that, we're talking about a Halloween party, and not just a party, a costume party. People were dressed up, they were wearing masks, their identity was disguised. You could have passed by someone you knew and not even known it was them. This was going to be a very difficult investigation for the police. They were hoping that Chelsea would just turn up. By the way, with this many people that detectives had to talk to, it meant they were going to get a lot of information. But not just information, misinformation. Not everyone was going to give them valuable leads. It was going to make the investigators' heads spin. Immediately, as they reached out on places like Facebook, they began to respond to comments that people were making, like saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to attend. You know, when I told you it went viral." Well, they were looking down the comments in these different groups, reaching out to each and every one, asking, "Did you go to the party like you said you were going to in this comment?" Already, the rumors were starting. They were hearing stories and assumptions about what could have happened. One of which was trafficking. Toledo and Detroit are very well known for that type of thing, so it wasn't completely out of the realm of possibility. But why Chelsea? Nobody else seemed to have gone missing, so that didn't really seem like the most valuable lead for them at the moment. But the next unusual tip was that there could have been a satanic ritual going on at this party, and Chelsea could have been burned alive. I know this is outrageous. When a family actually has to hear these things, it can be devastating. It can also be devastating to the investigation because these rumors spread like wildfire. You're definitely going to see that on the news. You're going to see that as a headline because the media loves these stories. Beautiful blonde goes missing at a party after a satanic ritual, when none of that was actually going on. We know this because investigators had to follow up on each and every one of those tips. They can't just let it go because it sounds absurd. Remember, there was a huge bonfire, 15 to 20-foot flames. Could someone have pushed someone into a fire? Yes, anything was possible. We're talking about people who were extremely intoxicated and doing drugs. That was another thing. The detectives kept hearing people admit they were completely wasted out of their minds. They were on drugs that night and didn't remember anything. It was a pretty insane party for a lot of people. So they had to take each and every one of those tips and run with them. They searched the bonfire, and it turned out, after sifting through all of the ashes, there were no human remains found. Now that this tip brought police and detectives onto Mike's family farm, they joined Chelsea's family and friends. They were out there in those fields behind Mike's house with their ATVs and their search dogs, but they didn't find anything in those fields or in the woods surrounding the farm. They combed it inch by inch. This wasn't a one-day search. These searches were going on every day. This entire time, people from the community were rallying together for this family. Because this party was so highly publicized and so many people did come out to it, there were so many who wanted to help. They wanted to be involved in finding Chelsea. Investigators were being very diligent. They were working fast, categorizing different leads, different tips, and people with information that they could use to pinpoint a select few they really wanted to speak to. Of course, they brought in all of Chelsea's friends, Becky, Laura, Heather, and Penny. When Penny heard what happened, Chelsea was missing and never came home that night, she felt regret. She said there was a lump in her throat. She didn't think anything bad happened in Monroe County. She just figured, she could be at a friend's house. Maybe something happened, but it definitely wasn't anything sinister. She just felt bad. Who wouldn't? You left your friend there alone. Early Tuesday morning, Becky actually got a knock on her door, and it was police. She was still expecting Chelsea to turn up, and she didn't realize how serious this was. But she was finally putting it together. She was thinking, could she be partially responsible for what happened because she left her friend? She took her friend's cell phone, so all of these things were going through Becky's head. She told the police everything. everything she knew. She also turned over all of Chelsea's belongings, including her cell phone. Becky decided to turn to Facebook to get the word out so that people could start looking for Chelsea. Penny was doing the same. As soon as she found out how intense and serious it was, she was out there every single night searching. She would put her kids to bed and meet with the search parties looking for Chelsea. They must have felt some sense of responsibility. That's the way I would be feeling. I'm not trying to project my feelings onto these individuals. This is what I heard them say in interviews, and I'm just saying I would feel the same. No one who was with her that night was feeling good about the fact that they left her alone. Investigators also asked friends about Chelsea's dating life, and they told them, no, she's single. She wasn't even seeing anyone. But of course, there were a couple of guys that she was interested in, but nothing more than that. Police wanted to know this information because they wanted to know if anyone could have picked her up that night. A boyfriend, an ex, someone she was seeing. So they brought in every single guy that Chelsea had ever been, even remotely involved with. They interviewed them, searched their homes, their cars, and took DNA samples, everything they could do, but they got no leads. So many people at this point were actually utilizing Mike's farm as a search command post, somewhere that everyone could gather. Mike even gave them a generator so that they would have electricity to run their laptops and other things that they might need. Chelsea's friends and family were camped out there in a tent. And the police definitely talked to Mike, by the way. Of course they did. Her friends gave the entire story of what happened, what they knew, and the next person they really wanted to dig into was Mike himself. Mike had a lot to say. First of all, he wasn't exactly happy speaking to investigators. You know why? Because he was greeted by the SWAT team. That's right, they paid him a very unpleasant visit as far as he was concerned, and they weren't very nice to him. He tried to let them in, but they were nasty to him. According to him, they took him, threw him on the ground, and even threatened to shoot his dog. I cannot tell you why they were so aggressive. I have no clue. I don't know why that happened, but they ended up searching all throughout Mike's home, his backyard, through the fields, and they started digging. They were digging up all sorts of areas. Mike said they dug up things that he had burned and buried when he was back in high school. He felt like he was being blamed for Chelsea not coming home that night. He did feel horrible. He felt horrible for her family. He couldn't imagine what it would be like. But he just didn't know what else he could do. All he was at fault for was throwing a party, or was he? That's what the investigators wanted to find out. He tells the police, I've been having parties like this on and off since high school, and they've always had a decent turnout. But he never expected anything like this to happen. He never expected this many people to show up, so he can't even tell you who was there. He has no idea. There were so many that they ran out of parking and people had to park on the streets. He tells investigators that around midnight until 2 a.m., he was actually out there trying to get people off of the streets. Mike was experienced in throwing parties like this. He's an entertainer, a vocalist in his band. All he was trying to do was set up a nice fun place for people to have a good time. Honestly, he kind of thought people were overreacting. Sometimes people get drunk, and sometimes they go home with someone and might not turn up for a couple of days. He didn't know Chelsea personally, so he was just thinking, you know what, this girl is just drunk somewhere. And that's what he told investigators, maybe she's just drunk somewhere. It didn't really look good when he showed up with blood all over himself after searching the fields. He didn't know that his dog was going to get hurt, and he's carrying him with blood all over himself. Maybe that's why the SWAT team attacked him. He kept explaining that he tried to do everything right. He had 15 security guards that were there on scene during the party. He organized everything, from the parking to the porta potties to having water and anything anyone needed. He even had parking attendants who were actually organizing and escorting people to the party near the tents. He took a whole week off of work to prepare for this party. He had to wait to get the tents delivered and all those porta potties. It was a lot of work, and he really was trying to be as responsible as he possibly could. Finally, they had gotten enough information from Mike. There was nothing leading them to believe that he was involved in Chelsea's disappearance. But that definitely didn't stop the public and the media from coming by and going through the fields at his farm at all hours of the night. There was one lady who came out there at like 3 o'clock in the morning with her dog to search his entire yard, and he just let it happen. There were drones above, people peeking into his windows at night, and helicopters flying over his house. This was a life-changing event for him. He was starting to feel like he wasn't even safe in his own home. You know how people can point fingers at someone just because of the way he looked? People were passing judgment on him because of his band, because of the name of his band, Pickaxe Preacher, and the type of music he sang. Everything they did was judgmental. But investigators had to move on to other leads, and they were definitely coming in. They ended up speaking to this guy, Gavin Hewlett. He's the one who said Chelsea was crying and approached him to use his phone about 1 o'clock in the morning. She told him that her friends had left her at the party. Another partygoer named Alexandria Fraunhofer had a similar story to tell. She said Chelsea asked her to use her phone somewhere between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, still trying to find a ride home from the party. Who was Chelsea calling? Well, we know one of those phone calls was to Laura. She spoke to Laura, and that's when Laura told her, "Sorry, I had to leave. I gave all of your things to Becky." Another one of those phone calls was to Penny, and Penny unfortunately let her know that she was already at home and in bed when she called. She was in no shape to be driving, so she couldn't come get Chelsea. It's so sad. Looking back, it makes you think. It just makes you think about your choices. But at this point, they still hope to find Chelsea and find her alive. When they asked Heather how the party was, she said it was unruly. There were people being kicked out because they were fighting. Even though there were so many people providing information, they still didn't have anyone who could put Chelsea somewhere with someone. They didn't know where she was going or who she was leaving with until police started to look through video footage. There were so many people there that, of course, a lot of them had phones, and they were taking pictures and videos for social media. So they collected a ton of video footage. I have some of it here of just the party so you can see what it looks like. It does look fun, lots of people hanging out and dancing. But there was someone spotted in the crowd. I didn't have the full details about everything, but apparently there was a guy selling merchandise. He was selling band t-shirts and helping out, and he was also there until the very end of the night. Some people saw him in the same vicinity as Chelsea when she was walking toward the gravel road. A lot of them had their cars full, and they were not going in her direction to maybe give her a ride. You know, many people don't live back in Maybee, Michigan. People were from Detroit and elsewhere, but they spotted that one guy. They actually put this out to the media and said if anyone has information about who this guy is, he's not a suspect. He's not in trouble. He's just someone we're looking to as a witness, somebody who could give them information about what he saw, because he could have been one of the last people who saw Chelsea alive. The person that gave the information in the video of this man selling merchandise said that he had dark hair and a thin mustache. He was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt with a black leather vest over it. It turns out when they tracked this witness down, he said, "Yes, I remember seeing Chelsea. I saw her leaving with a guy around 3 o'clock in the morning." But he told them there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. They were just having a normal, casual conversation. They are now able to put Chelsea with someone. This is big. They say, okay, so let's get a sketch artist in here. We have to know what this unidentified man looks like. So I want to show you what the sketch looks like. Here it is. He's a guy wearing a sweatshirt of some kind, maybe a hoodie. He's got glasses, some facial hair, and it looks like his hair is kind of swept over his forehead. This is the best description that had been provided by this guy who saw Chelsea leave with a man that looked like this at 3 o'clock in the morning from the parking area at the Halloween party. This is what they have, this is what they're going on, and this is what is released to the media and to the public. They just want answers at this point. Crime Stoppers has gotten involved, they've done segments on it, and they have a reward. That reward just keeps getting bigger until it's about $30,000 for any information leading to an arrest or finding Chelsea. They don't know if she's been taken or if she's been harmed. For all they know, this could just be another guy, another witness. Chelsea was seen walking with this unknown man, but nobody saw where they went or if they had gone to a vehicle or somewhere else. This is just all they knew. So Cassandra and her mom are doing interviews. There are a lot of newspapers that are doing articles about Chelsea's disappearance, and the family is encouraging people to share photos on social media so they could get the word out because she could be anywhere at this point. They're also making posters and putting up flyers all around town. They're being handed out at grocery stores and gas stations. Everyone in Maybee and in Monroe County is putting up these flyers. By November 4th, this was printed in the Detroit Free Press. They have a map here showing the location where Chelsea was last seen: Post Road and Williams Road in Frenchtown Township, Monroe County. As soon as I saw this, I went and pulled it up on Google Maps. I thought, okay, maybe this is the area right here, because see how large this piece of land is. I thought, okay, maybe this is where it took place. You can see how vast this farm is. We're looking at it from a bird's eye view. The wooded area, the cornfields, the fields. There must have been a lot for them to search, and still they turned up nothing. But there are just so many places someone could be out there, so much land. It is like in the middle of nowhere. It really is truly like trying to find a needle in a haystack, as they say. A candlelight vigil was set up. Everyone gathered, friends, family, relatives, and partygoers, to support the family and be a shoulder to cry on. Even Chelsea's bus driver from when she was younger attended and spoke at the vigil, as well as Cassandra, Megan, and Chelsea's mom. This is Megan and Cassandra on stage, speaking about their sister, telling the crowd what Chelsea was like, and hoping that someone will be able to find her. Leonda worked at the bank for several years, and there was this one branch that was only being used for ATM purposes. So her boss actually gave her the keys and permission to use this as a search operations center. They had 100 volunteers that were coming out every single day outside of the bank. So now they have their own place they can set up. This was November 4th. It hadn't been that long, and this many people were coming out. Leonda just kept saying, if you give up hope, you have nothing. If I give up hope, the family gives up hope and the volunteers all go home. I won't let my volunteers go home. There were thousands of flyers that had been posted and handed out, and there were hundreds of acres that had already been searched, and still they found nothing. At this bank branch, there were people going over maps. They were strategizing with one another. They were bringing in food, coffee, and donuts, and they even organized a Facebook group that had around 7,000 members at the time. Here is one of the flyers right here on the screen, and this is Leonda standing next to it. Chelsea Ellen Bruck, age 22, last seen at a Halloween party. It gives the address. She's 5'7", 140 pounds, blonde hair and green eyes with a tattoo behind her right ear. At this point, Michigan State Police have actually joined in, and they're doing their own search. But no matter how many people are coming together, they still weren't finding anything. Months were going by, but between those months, everyone was encouraged to wear purple, which was Chelsea's favorite color, so that they could constantly be reminded that she was not there with them, and to keep her in their minds. We have different flagpole events in our lives, seasons, celebrations, and things we look forward to with our families. Chelsea's family was looking forward to her coming home by Thanksgiving, and then by Christmas. This is a Catholic family. They're a religious family. They're holding out hope, they're praying, and trusting that God is going to give them a sign or an answer. They just want an answer to their prayers. They want to have Chelsea come home, but the holidays just came and went, and the new year was upon them. It was 2015, and they rang in the new year without getting any closer to finding out what happened to Chelsea. But there is a turning point. They're about to get some very terrifying information, vital information, from a woman that calls into the police station. Her name is Carrie Carr. She's frantically telling police that her boyfriend has just confessed to killing Chelsea, and of course, they are stunned. They immediately bring her in for questioning. I have a portion of this interview I want you to actually listen to, and I will relay it to you as well in case the audio is weird.
When I went to go leave, I walked out and I was trying to get in my car. He pulled out a knife. Okay, a pocket knife.
Okay.
And then he goes, "This is the one I used on Chelsea."
Apparently, her and her boyfriend were going through a breakup. They got into this huge fight, and when she tried to leave to get out to her car, he chased her down with a pocket knife. He said, "This is the one I used on Chelsea." She explains that her boyfriend actually tells her he went to that party, he left with Chelsea, and at some point he's responsible for taking her life and dumping her body in a cemetery in Toledo. Now, he was threatening to kill Carrie too. But you see, when she starts to explain this, she says her boyfriend didn't actually say Chelsea's last name. According to her, he just says, "I use this on Chelsea. Don't make me use it on you."
He grabbed me by my shirt and he had a knife and he goes, "This is what I used with Chelsea Bruck." He didn't say her name exactly.
What did he
He
say?
said,
I need
"This
to
is what
know
I used
exactly.
on Chelsea.
Okay.
Don't make me use it on you."
So detectives are a little concerned that maybe this really isn't that accurate. She doesn't sound stable or well put together, her story's all over the place, something doesn't add up. But they do have to take it seriously, of course they do. These investigators have been doing this for a long time, and they can see signs, they can see patterns. They really felt like there was something else going on. And as they started to question Carrie more and more, she kept saying how she wants him arrested right away and not to be released. It seems like she might have had a motive for giving this information to police.
"I want him locked up, but I can't have him
Okay.
questioned and then released. He lives on the same street as me.
Right.
He's going to come after me and my kid."
Well, they immediately bring this guy in and tell him everything that's going on. But before they even say Carrie's name, he tells them, "Okay, I've got this girlfriend, and we're on and off. We have a lot of problems. We've always had a lot of problems in the past. She kind of retaliates against me, and I honestly think she's just making up the story to put me behind bars." And it turns out that as unbelievable as it is, unbelievable that people can do this, that's exactly what this girl Carrie did. She was arrested for it. She was arrested for giving false information to police and interfering with an investigation, all because she wanted to get back at her boyfriend. So here she is literally saying that Chelsea had been killed and that this man did it, and it was all a lie. And this was one of two people who were arrested for lying to police. The other one was a 19-year-old guy named Harlan Bird, who came forward in February 2015. He told investigators he saw two men harassing Chelsea at the party, and he came to her rescue. He said he was yelling at them, trying to help her, but they took her and drove off. Well, it turns out, as they dug deeper and had more questions for Harlan, he changed his story and said he made up the whole thing. I wonder if this guy was trying to collect on the reward from Crime Stoppers. I don't know. But that's just sad, and it's really low. It's very selfish. And there's something else that's shocking that I just wanted to segue into for just a moment. While all this is going on, Cassandra and Leonda are the ones that are really leading the charge when it comes to the search efforts. There's someone who can really relate to what Cassandra is going through, and that's Cassandra's best friend, Jennifer. This was shocking to me. It's Jennifer Nice. Wonder, Leonda had been friends with Jennifer's mom, Kimberly Turnquist, for over a decade. Because Cassandra and Jennifer were such great friends growing up, when Jennifer's twin sister Julia went away to Eastern Michigan University, she was killed in 2012. She was only 23 years old when she was found murdered in her off-campus apartment in her bathtub. They have still not found her killer. This poor girl was found face down, partially nude. Her phone was thrown in the bathtub, her pants were cut off. She was bound at the wrist and at the ankles, and she had been tied up with a robe that she had left hanging on her bathroom door. When they got the evidence back, there were 2 sets of male DNA found on her. Her entire apartment was ransacked, but there was no forced entry and nothing was taken. Her computer was still there, her wallet and her purse, The only items that were missing were her pillowcase and a dresser drawer. Your best friend had a twin sister who was murdered just a couple of years before your own sister goes missing around the same age. So these two families are coming together and they're supporting one another, even though at this point, the Bruck don't know what happened to Chelsea. But losing someone, whether you know what happened to them or not, just the fact that you lose someone isn't very relatable. Cassandra has a best friend who has gone through this, and that case was so interesting for me to read about as well. Her grandfather is still fighting for someone to solve that case. It has been turned over to the Cold Case Foundation. With the advances in DNA evidence, it is so shocking to me to think that they cannot find out who did this type of thing to someone so innocent. I don't want to delve into the case for today. I just thought that was a very interesting fact. It's not every day I come across something like this when I'm researching, and this brought Leanda together with Kimberly for a memorial for Julia in the midst of Chelsea being missing. But something big is about to be uncovered. On March 22, 2015, a woman named Cheryl Retzleff was cleaning her yard, months' worth of debris across the county road that she lived on, like she does every spring. She came across a red shoe, a red flat, Mary Jane-type leather shoe on her 3.5-acre, partially wooded property on Moore Road, located 2.3 miles away from where the Halloween party took place, on the exact road that people would take to leave this party. The shoe was near a ditch with a lot of trash in it, and Cheryl always finds things like this. One time, she even found a camera hanging from a tree branch. She actually just put it in a trash bag and planned on throwing it away, but then when her husband came home, he asked, nonchalantly, "Oh, what'd you find today?" She mentioned the shoe. Now, considering how widespread Chelsea's story was, Cheryl's husband said, "You know what, if it's hers," and he didn't even have to say Chelsea's name, Cheryl knew who he meant. But she said, "No, it can't be. They've searched all winter. How could they have missed it?" But she calls the police anyway, just in case. The police come out, they take pictures of the shoe, collect it as potential evidence, and send a picture to Leanda. Sure enough, the shoe was identified as belonging to Chelsea. There are so many questions. Was Chelsea there? Could her shoe have fallen off as she was attempting to walk home? How would it get to this random ditch? Well, this area was searched and nothing else turned up. However, approximately 1 week later, a man named Eric Kassab stumbled upon something while he and some of his friends were scrounging for scrap metal. They were at an abandoned industrial site, which was 10 miles from where the Halloween party had been held. It was out on Peters Road, right here near these railroad tracks. Eric had picked up this rotting piece of plywood, and he thought he saw something like a plant growing out from underneath it. But when he went to move the plant, he realized it was fake. So he picked it up and moved it, and then he noticed, oh, this isn't a plant, it's an outfit of some kind. Underneath it was a red wig. It freaked him out. He wasn't expecting to find those kinds of items in a place like that. His friends saw it, and he was like, "Dude, that's a poison ivy costume." The guy almost kept it because he thought it looked cool, but they ended up just leaving it there. Get this. A week later, when Eric was at work, he saw a missing persons poster with Chelsea's face on it and her wearing the poison ivy costume. He couldn't help but think, could this be what I found? So he thinks about calling the police and reporting it, but then he gets scared. He was around the same age as Chelsea. He knew all about the way DNA worked. Most of us have some kind of understanding of it. He did not want to be considered a suspect, so he goes about his life and tries to forget it. But over the course of the next week, it just keeps nagging at him, so he finally tells his sister about it during an Easter brunch. His sister didn't think twice. She said, "You have to turn it in. You must. There's no other choice." She went so far as to tell him, "Listen, either you call the police, or I will." So he calls, he tells them what he found, and where they can find it. He gives them directions, the address to the building, all the details, and he doesn't think much of it. But as he's sitting down for Easter dinner with his family, his phone rings, and it's a detective. They say it's pretty suspicious that he waited a whole week to notify them, so they tell him, "We need you to come down." Well, Eric suspected this would happen, and before I get into what happens next, I just want to say that I really believe there wouldn't have been connections like this between these items and these two different people who found them if Leonda hadn't been so devoted to Chelsea's cause. Just look at this headline from a month later. More than 1.2 million flyers have been sent out by Leonda and her team of supporters. She said that they almost hit every state because of one determined mother that is living out this nightmare of losing her child. This 52-year-old woman is spending 4 days a week for the past 6 months since her daughter had been missing at this bank that she was using as a command post with family and friends, stuffing envelopes and putting flyers all around. And it paid off. Detectives probably wouldn't have these leads. Back at the station, they are grilling Eric. It turns out that the detectives think he's lying or that he's not giving them all the information. They ask him, "Did you go to that Halloween party?" He says, No. But you know, I do have an ex-girlfriend, the mother of my child, and she lives over there. But not only that, she lived on Moore Road, the road that Cheryl lives on, the road where the shoe was found. Detectives want to know if he knew Chelsea, but he's adamant he did not. He says he was with his daughter that whole weekend, and he agrees to give them his DNA and his fingerprints. Turning away from Eric for just a moment, detectives make another connection, or I should say reconnection. Remember Harlan Bird, the 19-year-old that tried to come forth as a hero, saying, "Oh, I tried to save Chelsea to protect her," only to crack when they started questioning him further and say that he made up the whole thing? When the leotard and the wig were found, detectives realized they were found 100 yards away from the trailer park community where he lives with his grandma. You can pretty much see Harlan's house from where the costume was found, and they do not chalk it up as a coincidence. They bring him back in, and this time, he has an attorney. They want Harlan to explain why they end up finding Chelsea's clothing a walking distance from Grandma's trailer. He tells them he has no clue how those clothes got there, and it wasn't him that put them there. But he does admit, "I have been to the abandoned building before." He says, "Unless someone's trying to set me up, trying to frame me, I cannot explain how her costume got there." He swore he had nothing to do with her disappearance. He agrees to take a polygraph test, and he provides a DNA sample. He passes the polygraph, no problem. Can people game polygraphs? Yes, but at least they have this guy's DNA, so if they're able to obtain any DNA from the items they find, they could get a match. DNA isn't going to make up stories. DNA isn't going to lie. So at this point, detectives are satisfied for now, and now they wait. They sent the leotard and the wig in for testing, hoping that some brown stains that were found on the leotard would end up being of significance and not just like spilled wine. I want to tell you more about the leotard because there were a couple of very significant findings. First, I told you about the stains, but now the straps. They were twisted, stretched, and torn. They appeared as though they were ripped off of Chelsea by force. Most significant, though, was the crotch area of the leotard. It had been completely ripped apart, detached, severed, if you will. It's pretty obvious to detectives that Chelsea did not willingly remove this garment from her own body. At this point, supporters and volunteers from the community have passed out over 300,000 flyers, with businesses donating the paper to create them. Pizza places were including them in every pizza delivery box. Because of this, Cheryl and Eric came forward, linking the items that they found to Chelsea's disappearance. Yet still no Chelsea. How did the shoe get so far from where the wig and the leotard were found? Where was she? Two of Chelsea's sisters were about to get married, one in about a month and Megan in June. Chelsea was in these weddings. She was looking forward to them. She would never miss those moments for anything in this world. So to her loved ones, it meant that she was no longer a part of this world. Now it's April 24th, 2015, 3 weeks after the discovery of Chelsea's Halloween costume at that abandoned building near the train tracks. John Marcon was doing construction on his 13-acre underdeveloped, heavily wooded property, which was also near some train tracks, but not the same ones where the abandoned building was. This was on Briar Hill Road in Ash Township, which is part of Monroe County. about 7 miles from where Big Mike's was located and 6 miles from that abandoned building. John and a construction crew were bringing bulldozers through an area that they were trying to clear to build a home. John was on the phone with his wife. He was hauling some dirt around in a dirt pile, and he was trying to squeeze the bulldozer through a really tight area when he got stuck in some wet dirt. So he gets out, goes behind the vehicle, turns to his left and sees something out of the ordinary. Something that really didn't look right. We can sense these things in a split second. Our brains can differentiate between something that's supposed to be somewhere and something that is just so out of the ordinary and unusual that it doesn't make sense. He saw what looked like a skeleton. He told his wife, "I gotta go," and quickly dialed 911. I actually have his 911 call, and I gotta warn you, it's bad. He is terrified. He's in shock. He's freaked out. He lets the operator know, "I just found a dead body on my property." The operator asks whether he could tell if it was a male or a female, and John doesn't hesitate. He says it's a female, it has hair, it's blonde. He says that he thinks it's the girl that's been posted all over town. Let me explain. John is just making an assumption. The body that he found was merely skeletal in nature. There was no face, it was severely decomposed. So was this Chelsea or was it someone else? Michigan State crime technicians came out immediately to investigate. It's worth mentioning that there were sticks and logs that were placed on top of the remains, and it appeared as though someone had tried to cover it up. Investigating further, they find one single artificial ivy leaf nearby, and it looked exactly like the ones from Chelsea's leotard. They also find a pair of green leggings and another red shoe that matched the one they found on Cheryl's property. I mean, at this point, even without confirming the identity of the remains, they're fairly certain that they finally found Chelsea. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office for a full examination, and it's a waiting game once again. However, the detectives do notify Chelsea's family, just in case. They were hoping it wasn't going to be Chelsea, but they knew that the media would be all over the story, so detectives wanted to personally let them know there's a possibility that this can be your loved one. A couple of days later, the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office used dental records to officially confirm the identity of the skeletal remains, and it was in fact Chelsea Bruck. Not only that, but it was determined that her cause of death was homicide. Anyone who may have been thinking that this woman walked off intoxicated, passed out, and died was wrong. Someone caused Chelsea to disappear, and further, their actions resulted in her death. The autopsy revealed the horrific truth about how Chelsea died. Her jaw was broken into 2 pieces, just broken in half. It takes a tremendous amount of force to cause those types of injuries, and there were a number of facial injuries. Several of her facial bones were fractured, for example, the areas around both of her eyes. Chelsea died from blunt force trauma to her head. There was no DNA or trace evidence found on the body itself, but Chelsea's blood was in the front inside portion of the leotard, and a male's DNA was also found. It's so obvious that this was a murder committed during a forced sexual act, but when they run this DNA through their CODIS system, they don't get any hits, and this case hits a dead end. But at least Chelsea's family can bring her home and lay her to rest. This horrific homicide shocked the small community. They just couldn't believe that anything like this could happen in Monroe, because these things didn't happen there, and everyone is devastated. Chelsea's family ends up sending out a message to the media, and they say thank you to everyone for your kind words and your prayers during this difficult time. We worked tirelessly for 6 months to find Chelsea. She has been returned to us, and we can take relief in knowing that she's with our Heavenly Father. Our faith is strong, and we continue to put everything in God's hands. We appreciate everyone's help, time, and funding, no matter how big or small. Receiving this news has been devastating to our family. I can't even begin to imagine a mother's pain like this. But Leanda no longer stayed up all night wondering where her daughter was, and she was finally able to put away all of Chelsea's laundry, which had been folded and left in a basket since the day Chelsea went missing. She just couldn't bring herself to put it away. It's so sad, and I'm so sorry for this family. Leanda also returned to her job as a bank teller, She was finally able to have some closure, but they still didn't know who did this to her daughter or why, until over a year later. That is when they get their next clue, and it's a big one. It was July 21st, 2016, and something unexpected happened. There was a hit on that DNA. It was a match to a 27-year-old man who grew up in Monroe County. However, compared to the way Chelsea grew up, these two were like night and day. His name is Daniel Clay. His mom was in prison when he was born, so he was put up for adoption right away. Unfortunately, life did not get better for Daniel. His adoptive parents got a divorce when he was 5 years old, and he ends up living with his adopted father until he died when Daniel was 17. There was nowhere for him to go, so he was put in a children's home. Growing up, Daniel never had any stability. He got into drugs as a teenager and was always getting in trouble. By 18, Daniel was out of the youth home but still doing drugs. He had odd jobs here and there. He worked at a gas station and restaurants, but he never kept a job for more than a few months, and he never had a place to live. He just slept on friends' or girlfriends' couches. He ended up getting one of those girlfriends pregnant, but didn't want anything to do with the child. He wouldn't even pay child support, which led to warrants being issued for his arrest. He was in trouble with the law too. Things like battery, resisting arrest, obstruction of justice, drug charges, sexual misconduct, and most recently, in May of 2016, larceny for stealing someone's backpack. When he was booked for that, he didn't even spend the night in jail, but because of a new law, they were able to take his DNA, and that is what led to the match. Detectives were eager to get Daniel into the station. They had so many questions. They weren't questioning whether this was their guy. It had to be, right? He fit the mold. He was a criminal with a rough upbringing who knew this area and was probably at that party. He also had a pending charge for forced intercourse and lived close to where the party was held. So why else would his DNA be where they found it? He had a warrant out for his arrest for failure to pay child support. So on July 22nd, they surrounded the house he was staying in and arrested him, bringing him in. Daniel thinks that he's being arrested merely related to the child support, but detectives begin to move toward the questions regarding the Halloween party. Daniel has no problem admitting, "Yeah, I went," but he says he didn't stay long. When they asked him if he knew Chelsea, he said, "Oh, I know who you're talking about. Of course." He was basically like, "Yeah, there are posters everywhere. She's the blonde girl. She went missing." But he denies ever meeting her or knowing her. He says that he just watched things on the news about Chelsea. But what about the DNA? I hate liars, and this guy in particular makes my skin crawl. Just wait, because the things he says in this interview and later are the reasons that I decided to do this case. There's never enough awareness brought to these kinds of cases with these types of people, and he was being really arrogant. He was telling detectives that he was a real ladies' man, and that, oh yeah, I definitely knew a lot of women, just not Chelsea. He goes on to say, "Oh, you know, I even knocked up a couple of women, and I had kids with them, and I have a third one on the way with another lady." Okay, buddy, it just makes me sick. He says, "I live like it should be the 70s, free love. I like peace and love, that's my motto." He says he doesn't like fighting or violence, just smoking weed and having sex. Well, Daniel, does that include taking it by force? He goes on to brag about how confident he is, how he can get any girl, and the detectives are just playing him. They're just like, "Wow, you're lucky, man."
You're a lucky man. I wish girls would well, I think I'm a pretty confident kind of guy.
That's when detectives ask him, "Is there any reason that your DNA would be on Chelsea's clothes?" They tell him, "We have your DNA, we have it, and it's on her clothing. Can you tell us why you would be there?" And he's like, "No, I can't think of a reason why I would be anywhere near or on Chelsea."
I did not do anything to that girl. Did not. Telling you.
I think Daniel may have been thinking, wait a minute, if I say there's no reason that the DNA would be there, it means I can't explain it away. So his story starts to change. Detectives are super patient, and they have to be in order to get to the bottom of things. This is when detectives have to play like good cop, saying, "Oh, we don't think you're a murderer." No, that's exactly what they think. Finally, Daniel basically says, "Oh wait, yeah, you know what? Now that I think about it, I did have sex with a woman that night at the party. Yeah, I don't know how I could have forgotten about that. But yeah, I met a girl, and we went into my car and went into the back seat, and we had sex, and then we just went our separate ways."
So that means I had sex with someone and I just don't know. Like I was out in the car with somebody and then not long later I talked to my baby mama, got in the car and left. Okay? I do not think you're a murderer. I'm being upfront. Okay? I'm being honest with you. I've been honest with you 100%. Okay? Alright? I think something happened. You did not have any intent to hurt her. I didn't do anything to her. She just something happened when I left her. She got out of the car and walked away.
Because all along, Daniel was assuming the DNA was semen. That's why he's admitting to having consensual sex with some girl that could have been Chelsea. However, Daniel was obviously not thinking with his other head, because the DNA of Daniel's that the detectives found was actually skin cells on the areas of the leotard that were ripped. That's incredible. Think about it for a moment. The portions of the straps being pulled caused skin cells to come off of his hands. The force used to pull them apart, the straps and the crotch area were torn, and her leggings had been ripped open along the seams between the legs.
I have the DNA where her stuff was torn. Nobody else's. Nobody. No one. Okay? Either something happened where it was intentional, unintentional, accidental. No, I didn't do that to her. Or was it an accident? I had sex with a girl, that's it.
And only Daniel's DNA was in those areas related to tearing off articles of clothing. Now, what was Daniel going to do? He had already lied so many times that he didn't know Chelsea, that he never saw her at the party, that he never had sex with her. Well, now it was the detectives' turn to lie, and I love this part. They had to get Daniel back in their hands, and they're allowed to lie. It's a tactic. Some may not agree with it, but it's allowable in these interrogations. So they lie and say that they know something that the media doesn't, something about Chelsea that only her mother knows. Don't forget, this is a lie. She has brittle bone disease, a condition where even the slightest punch or bump or bang can cause her bones to fracture. Detectives are trying to insinuate that there could have been an accident just by Daniel having sex with her. Now they wait.
And I'm going to tell you one thing that nobody knows about Chelsea Bruck except us and her mother, is that she had brittle bone disease. Brittle bone disease is a simple touch. I break my okay? So that's what happened. It was an accident.
And Daniel's trying to come up with his next lie. His story changes once again. He says, "Well, there was a second time that we had sex. I was driving away from the party, and I saw Chelsea carrying her wig while she was walking down the road by herself. He says he stops and is so polite. He asks her if she needs a ride home. So, she gets in, and this second time she wants to have sex, but she wants to get freaky. He says that she wants him to choke her. This is his story. That this girl who met him that night trusts him enough to let him put his hands around her neck for some erotic asphyxia. He says she was just so intoxicated, she became aggressive, and she was biting him, smacking him, and yelling for him to choke her. And he said, I did what she asked. I held her for maybe 20 or 30 seconds. And all of a sudden, her body went limp. He said he tapped her face and realized she wasn't breathing. He said, I guess I choked her too hard. He adds, I wasn't even choking her that hard. I didn't think so. And he has the audacity to add this, that he's had many girlfriends that like to be choked and he knows how to do it. But he didn't realize she had brittle bone disease. He's trying to act like a hero. He says, I tried to do CPR, but I don't know how to do it. So Daniel, women allow you to practice erotic asphyxia without knowing how to revive them if things go wrong. I'd argue that's part of knowing how to do it.
She told me to choke her. I choked her. That would be switched, but she got underneath me. And I don't know, for a minute, and then she kind of stopped and she went limp, so I stopped and I'm like, and I started tapping her face and, okay, I guess I choked her too hard or something like that. I wasn't even choking her that hard, I didn't think. Okay? I've got girlfriends that like to be choked and stuff. I know how to do it. I didn't realize her bones were brittle over it.
Then he says he freaks out puts her in the back of his car, and he's scared. He doesn't know what to do, so he just drives and drives until he can figure out what he should do next, eventually deciding to dump her body in a wooded area near some train tracks. But what about her items of clothing being 5 and 7 miles apart? How does he explain that? I know it's not my place to tell you what I think, but I do think he took her to that abandoned building. Maybe she threw her own shoe out the window to leave a clue, who knows? But I just know this man is a liar, and he swears he has no idea how her things got scattered. Really? Detectives also have their theories. They think something must have set Daniel off. Either he had this plan all along, watching women come and go in and out of this party like a hunter just waiting for the right victim, and he found it in Chelsea, or maybe she did ask for a ride. We know how desperate she was to get home that night, and she made the mistake of trusting a guy who looked relatively normal. Maybe he pulled a move on her and she resisted, so he beat her into submission. We just won't know because Daniel lies. They arrested Daniel Clay for murder, but before the news has even gotten out, someone has leaked the info to Chelsea's friend Becky, a co-worker from Olga's kitchen, a woman named Jessica. But how did she find out? Well, Daniel told her himself. It turns out, Jessica was the mother of Daniel's son, and she was the one phone call that Daniel made when they booked him. He called her 2 times while she was at work that day, and left voicemails saying that he was sorry, that he had messed up big time, and that he was going to be gone for a really, really long time. So Jessica was crying hysterically to Becky, and when she was finally able to compose herself long enough, she said, "My son's father killed Chelsea, and I'm so sorry." And get this, when investigators trace that call, they question Jessica about what she may know, and she tells them she remembers Daniel coming up to a group that both she and Chelsea were a part of. They were all talking in that group at that Halloween party, but she doesn't remember what the conversation was about. Later, she said she smoked some weed with him, and then she remembered seeing Chelsea between about 1 and 1:30 in the morning. So this man was actually in a group of people with Chelsea. His ex works with Chelsea. He saw Chelsea walking. He killed her, most likely because he isn't confident. He isn't a ladies' man that can get any girl he wants, at least not a girl like Chelsea. Daniel pleaded not guilty. He only confessed to an accidental death, not murder. In May of 2017, he went to trial. He literally tried representing himself at one point, and he took the stand. These types of people do that sometimes. They're just so arrogant. But eventually, he does get a court-appointed attorney, and his trial lasted 10 days. Daniel tried to argue he accidentally asphyxiated Chelsea, but Chelsea died of blunt force trauma with intense force, which was not an accident at all. Daniel tried to argue that those fractures were actually due to the fact that he had trouble carrying Chelsea. He couldn't carry her dead body through the woods and kept dropping her because he was so intoxicated that he kept blacking out. In that case, he didn't even care about her after he did what he did, no regard. But we know he's lying, and to drive that point home, the prosecution had a doctor testify about manual strangulation. They stated that you gotta hold someone's neck hard enough to cut off that air and blood flow and keep it cut off for an additional 2 minutes, post-loss of consciousness. So after she went limp, an additional 2 minutes would have been needed. They brought in a CPR mannequin to demonstrate this to the jury, saying even if Daniel was telling the truth, this is how long he would have needed to hold his hands around her. I love demonstrations like this. So the prosecutor sat in front of the jury and took the mannequin, and for 2.5 whole minutes, he held his hands around the mannequin's neck. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before finding him guilty of felony murder. The felony was a criminal sexual conduct, which we use the R word for here in California. Daniel tried to argue to the court, but the judge, also named Daniel S. White, said this: "I spent 10 days in trial with Mr. Clay, and I listened to countless hours of him changing his story every time the detectives questioned him or brought up something new. It was very clear to me, Mr. Clay, you're a liar, a brute, and a killer." And I agree. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and in a separate and pending case, Daniel was found guilty of forced intercourse on another woman that took place back in 2016. After what he did to Chelsea, he had broken into this woman's home and forced himself on her. For that, he got an additional sentence of 40 to 75 years, and the judge said this was a brutal rape. It was degrading, dehumanizing, and Mr. Clay, you're just an opportunist and a predator. You're a liar and a serialist. As for Chelsea's mom, she shared with the media that she had forgiven Daniel and given him a Bible, which Daniel said he would keep. Leanda also wanted to give a message. If you go somewhere with your friends in a group, leave in that same group, 2 in, 2 out. That's my motto. If I go somewhere with you, I am not going to leave you behind. Don't leave anyone behind. Tonight is Halloween. Don't leave anyone behind. Every day, there's an opportunity to go somewhere where you may not know people. Don't leave someone behind. In the small town of Roaring Spring, Kentucky, a fire erupted in a family's home. Firefighters rushed to save those inside, battling the blaze with everything they had. But once the flames were extinguished, they uncovered something far more sinister. This is the story of the Friendley family. Now, let's get into the case for today. It's the evening of October 15th, 2008. Emergency personnel are rushing around Jenny Stewart Medical Center in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, as a patient in critical condition is about to be transported into their emergency department from the small rural community of Roaring Spring, about 16 miles away. The information known to authorities at this time was that a fire had engulfed a property where a female had been found outside in the backyard, badly injured, burned, and clinging to life. The patient was identified as 36-year-old mother of 3, Christy Friendley. Upon her arrival and subsequent medical assessment, it was determined that Christy would need to have immediate and extensive life-saving surgery, which included placing her in a medically induced coma. No one knew what had happened to Christy, and she was unable to speak. About 30 people were gathered outside the hospital. They were waiting for updates on Christy's condition, but it would be a while before they knew whether Christy would pull through. Meanwhile, police were trying to find out as much information about her as possible in an attempt to piece together the events that led to this horrific situation. Deputy Kenneth Butts, who accompanied Christy to the hospital via ambulance, was also a close friend of hers. Christy was his daughter-in-law's best friend. He had known her most of her life. He held her hand and her head the entire ride. He was able to provide information about her identity and how she was found. He was a former firefighter and the first officer on the scene. He was directed to the backyard of her residence, located at 169 Military Road in Roaring Spring, where he found Christy floating inside her above-ground pool. It was connected to a deck attached to a few stairs that led to a set of French doors to a main bedroom of her one-story home that she shared with her children. It was apparent that her wounds were life-threatening. He observed cuts to the back and front of Christy's neck. Shocked, he frantically asked, "Christy, who did this to you? Do you know them?" Before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you who Christy Friendley is and the life she was living before that fateful fall afternoon in 2008, when she would find herself close to death in her own backyard, and now fighting for her life in surgery. Christy was born in May of 1972 to parents Michael and Linda Glass, but she said that even though that's when life began for her, Christy's favorite 3 chapters of her life are when her 3 children were born. Becoming their mother was what she was the most proud of. She lived for her children. Christy married Doug Williams, and by May 19, 1991, they were welcoming their daughter, Kayla Elaine Williams, into the world. Christy was only 19 at the time. She was overjoyed, but it wasn't long before it became apparent that things were not going to work out between her and Doug. They divorced soon after Kayla was born, and just a few years later, by 1994, Christy was about to have her second child, another daughter that she named Courtney Lynn McBurney. Courtney's father, Roy McBurney, did not become a fixture in his daughter's life. Instead, Christy found herself as a single mother of 2 girls until she met and fell in love with Jeff Hugh Friendley VI, a U.S. Master Army Sergeant stationed at Fort Campbell Military Base located on the Kentucky-Tennessee border. Christy ended up marrying Jeff, and her daughter Courtney even took his last name. She became Courtney Lynn McBurney Friendley, and Jeff adopted her. Then, just 3 years later, on January 26, 2003, Christy and Jeff had a son together who they named Ethan Zane Friendley. Now they were a family of 5, with Kayla 12 years old, Courtney 9, and newborn Ethan to add to the mix. Life was very busy in the Friendley household. They were living in the Roaring Spring neighborhood, a rural, close-knit, safe community where everyone knew one another and never locked their doors. It was conveniently only 25 minutes away from Fort Campbell. This is what Roaring Spring looks like from a bird's-eye view, very green. The homes are on a lot of land, but they're close enough together for residents to develop a strong sense of community. You get to experience 4 distinct seasons in this part of Kentucky as well, and that means there are a variety of different activities and events every season. This brings in locals and visitors as well. The cost of living is low, and there are many beautiful areas nearby. Not to mention, many active military and veterans decide to settle down here since it's close to Fort Campbell. Roaring Spring is part of Trigg County. The main and most lively area is the city of Cadiz, which is about 25 minutes north, and that's where all the schools are, where the downtown area is, and you can find lots of restaurants, shopping, and social events taking place. Buses would transfer children to and from Roaring Spring to Cadiz on the weekdays to attend school. Kayla and Courtney, only being about 3 years apart, were very close growing up. However, after her sophomore year in high school, Kayla did decide to go live with her biological father, Doug Williams, in California for a little while. Things were good in the Friendleys' lives until they weren't. Issues were brewing between Jeff and Christy, and by the time 2007 rolled around, it would prove to be a very challenging year. They were in the middle of a heated divorce and custody battle over 4-year-old Ethan. Christy had also recently lost her job as a hairstylist. The divorce was finalized in February, and in July the court granted Christy custody of Ethan and ownership of the family home that they were living in at 169 Military Road in Roaring Spring. Jeff moved out, but then, that same month, he submitted for temporary custody of his son, citing that Christy was endangering Ethan by being intoxicated in front of the kids, keeping the house a mess, and not taking Ethan to regular doctor's appointments. The court granted the temporary switch of custody from Christy to Jeff, while these allegations were being investigated, and Ethan began living with his father and attending kindergarten in Clarksville, Tennessee. This was a tough time for everyone, but especially tough on Christy, whose world revolved around her children. Ultimately, Trigg Circuit Judge C.A. Woodall determined that Jeff's claims were unfounded. There was no evidence to support that Christy had any problems with substance abuse. She even submitted to court-ordered drug tests, which all came back negative for illicit drugs. Therefore, on October 1, 2008, the judge decided not to permanently alter the custody agreement, and Ethan went back into Christy's care after months of being separated from his mother. While all of this was going on, 17-year-old Kayla had decided to move back from California, where she'd been with her biological dad, Doug, and back in with Christy. She began to attend Trigg County High School with her 14-year-old sister, Courtney. She wanted to spend some time with that side of her family until she graduated. Then, she had plans to return to her father's out in California to go to college. It didn't take long for Christy and the kids to get back into the swing of things. Christy's oldest daughter, Kayla, was already well known in the town. She had grown up there, and now she was back. Her best friend from childhood, Danielle Riddick, couldn't have been more excited. She and Kayla had been inseparable since middle school when they were on the yearbook staff together. They even had an entire page in the yearbook filled with pictures of just the two of them. Danielle was so sad when Kayla moved away, but they talked on the phone every day, so she felt like her best friend had never really left. But now they were reunited. They enjoyed going to the movies, attending football games, and just being ordinary teenage girls. They spent many sunny days in Kayla's backyard, which everyone referred to as the beach house, because the pool area was like a little oasis. Kayla was a beautiful, studious, popular, athletic teenager. She looked a lot like her mama. She was the secretary of the senior class, part of the high school's dance team, and she was the chapter president of Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America. Taking on this role allowed Kayla to motivate and inspire her classmates. But she was like most girls her age. She just enjoyed spending time with friends, being outside in the sunlight, especially if that meant jogging around her neighborhood, playing soccer, swimming, and of course, four-wheeling, which she loved to do. What Kayla was looking forward to the most was getting her driver's license. 14-year-old freshman and middle child, Courtney, was a bit quieter than her older sister, and like many teens, she liked spending time on social media. The go-to websites at the time were MySpace and Bebo, where she had profiles that said she loved God, and she was the happiest when she was around her friends and skateboarding. She listed her favorite music as hard rock and rap, and her favorite food as chicken and dumplings. Her biggest fear was sharks. Her sunny personality and bright smile reflected her positive attitude toward life. She was always willing to help classmates and teachers, never wanting to disappoint anyone. Courtney had been interested in becoming an orthodontist since she was just a little girl, and she hoped to pursue that dream one day. Both of Christy's daughters adored their little brother, Ethan. They were always looking out for him, playing with him, and making sure he was taken care of. He was adorable, and it was hard not to love little Ethan. Everywhere he went, he was making people smile. He was just so fun and full of life. Like many little boys his age, he would talk non-stop. He loved being outside, riding his bike, and he loved animals, especially bugs. Ethan enjoyed collecting earthworms and bringing them home to his mom in Ziploc bags. Despite being new to the school, Ethan was already well known by the staff at Trigg County Primary School. He had attended preschool at Cottie's Methodist Church before beginning kindergarten back in Tennessee with his dad. But now, back in Roaring Spring, he loved to dance with his classmates, especially to the Nutcracker, and he was known throughout the school for his incredible hugs that made everyone around him feel loved and appreciated. Despite his young age, Ethan left a lasting impression on the people he interacted with. He seemed like a bit of what some people call an old soul. Contrary to what her ex-husband, Jeff, may have said in his court filings, Christy did not keep a messy house. She took pride in her home, kept the landscaping very neat, and loved spending time in her flower garden. That's where you could find her any time she had time off. Now that she was between jobs, she was spending more time tending to her garden. But there was another reason. She wanted to make the home look nice and have curb appeal. She had recently put it up for sale through a realty agency called Service First. Even though she loved the Roaring Spring area, it was time for a change. She was sick of the 20-minute commute to Trigg County anytime she needed anything. She and the kids looked forward to selling their home and moving closer to town. Now I want to jump back to October 15th. It was a normal day. Kayla, Courtney, and Ethan left on the school bus that morning. They were expected to be dropped back off by the bus at 4 p.m. like every other school day. But just 58 minutes past 4 p.m., a neighbor called 911 to report black smoke billowing out of Christy's home, which was directly across the street from the Roaring Spring Volunteer Fire Department, mere yards away. Karen Walker was one of the first residents to see the blaze after picking her son up from school. When she realized that Christy's Jeep was parked in the driveway, she knew Christy and the kids were probably inside the house. Karen stopped and began screaming, "There are babies in there!" A man named Sean Laurie, who lived on a nearby road and had been in the middle of packing for his deployment to Afghanistan, noticed the smoke and heard the commotion. When he heard someone scream, "There are kids inside the house," he jumped into action, running right into the burning house through the front door. He yelled to see if anyone was inside, but he didn't get an answer and couldn't hear anything. Then the fire began raging even bigger, making it hard to breathe because of the smoke, and the heat became too overwhelming for Sean. He couldn't keep going, so he ran back outside. It was a frantic scene as they waited for firefighters to arrive. Although the station was right across the street, it took them 9 minutes to get to Christy's house after that initial 911 call came in. But you know how this goes. Someone calls, they try to figure out what's going on, and they transfer you to another department. At 5:15, locals John Schrecker, a Hopkinsville businessman, and John McCubbin, a physician, were out for a bike ride when they saw a bunch of smoke coming from a home in Roaring Spring. Then 2 ambulances raced past them. They followed the emergency vehicles and saw the house up in flames. John Schrecker was the one who took this photo with his phone, one of the only photos I've seen of the house on fire. At that point, emergency personnel were just arriving on the scene, and a police officer was already blocking off the driveway with caution tape. We know that Christy was transported to Jenny Stewart Medical Center that evening after being spotted floating in her pool. When Christy was admitted to the hospital, she was cold to the touch and had a rapid heart rate. Yes, Christy had burns, but the other injuries were not consistent with a house fire. When being examined, doctors noticed Christy had a fractured skull, several life-threatening stab wounds to her neck, and her ear canal and vocal cords had been severed. It wasn't until an X-ray was done that doctors discovered a broken-off butter knife lodged in her neck. Dr. Francis Marshall Van Meter removed that knife during surgery and closed up what wounds he could. It was obvious that someone had tried to murder her, but who? Close friend and Deputy Kenneth Butts explained that when he saw Christy, he asked, "What happened?" She said someone forced themselves on her. She used the R word that I can't use here, but the deputy asked, "Christy, who did this?" She replied, "I don't know him." That was all the information they had, but it was enough to make sure they collected a vaginal swab as part of the investigation before she was taken away and into surgery. Miraculously, Christy survived, but it would take several hours before she was able to communicate with anyone again. As she went in and out of consciousness, she asked about her children. She was told that they were in good hands, and that what was important right now was that she got some rest. They needed Christy to pull through so they could ask her important questions that would hopefully lead to the arrest of the man who did this to her. There were so many questions, and it would be 3 days before Christy was coherent enough to understand the gravity of the situation and provide any information to the police. Christy was well known and loved in her community. Everyone was waiting for her to wake up, her family, friends, and even local law enforcement agents who were close to Christy were praying for her recovery. Finally, Christy was awake and surrounded by familiar faces. Everyone in the room was happy that Christy had made it out alive. This poor woman had already been through so much, but now investigators wanted to speak to her, so she remembered as much as she could. The longer they waited, the more Christy could forget everything. It's tough because they know it's best for her to rest, but she won't be leaving the hospital anytime soon. It's going to be a long road to recovery, but they let her know that they're counting on her to tell them what happened. As tough as it is, Christy wants to tell her story. Her last thought when she was inside her pool before being rescued was that she couldn't believe what had just happened. What started out as an ordinary day ended up being the worst day of Christy's life, and now she was about to have to relive it. What I'm about to tell you are Christy's words. This is Christy's story. I'm going to try not to deviate from what she told investigators. This is what I found in legal documents and what I heard her say in her own words in interviews. Christy is alive to tell each and every horrific detail of what this monster did to her on October 15th, 2008. The story actually started a week before October 15th, when Christy and the kids were outside doing some yard work. A man that she had never seen before walked up to her property. He looked like he was in his 40s and had salt and pepper hair. There was nothing really noteworthy about his appearance overall. The man said he was looking for a person who lived in the neighborhood, and when he asked Christy and the kids, they didn't know who this person was. So, the man left. Christy said that she didn't think anything of it at the time, but that same man approached her house a week later, on the afternoon of October 15th, while Christy's kids were at school. Christy was in her yard, on the phone with a friend, when the man came into her backyard. She recognized him as the same man who had come around a week prior, but this time he wasn't asking about someone. He was inquiring about Christy's house for sale. He asked her if she would be able to give him a little tour. He said he was interested in purchasing a home in the area. Christy told her friend, "Hey, I gotta go," and she got off the phone. At first she was hesitant about letting a stranger inside, but she thought to herself, you know what? He's wearing his DirecTV work shirt. And for those who aren't familiar, this is a cable TV company work shirt. So she figured he was probably in the neighborhood just working and had stopped by quickly to look at the house. So she agreed to give him a tour inside, which would prove to be the worst decision of her life. He came inside the home with her, and they started with the living room. Then she showed him the laundry room, which was off the living room. He was just kind of standing behind her the whole time, following her through the house, and he was silent. He wasn't asking any questions, which Christy thought was a little weird. Then she began showing him the bathroom, and that's when things changed. The man grabbed Christy by the neck, held a gun to her head, and told her to do what he said, or no one would get hurt. Christy was shocked and scared. She had no idea what was going to happen, why he was there, or what he wanted. He then forced her into her son Ethan's bedroom, pushed Christy's face down on her son's bed, and put her hands behind her back. He took out zip ties and began putting them on her wrists, tying them together behind her back. Then he used zip ties to tie her ankles together as well. The man was quiet the whole time. He was calm. And then, he took her from Ethan's room and moved her into her own bedroom and forced her to sit up on the bed with her legs and arms still bound. That's when the man began to speak. First, he asked Christy if there were any guns in the house, and she said no. Then he wanted to know who lived there. Christy didn't lie. She told him she lived there with her 3 children. He asked how old they were. Christy said 17, 14, and 5 years old. Again, the man asked if anyone else lived in the house with them, and she said no, it's just us. He asked if Christy was divorced, and she said yes. Then he said, "Are you sure? No one else lives in this house with you?" And Christy again told him no. This next part is strange. The man began to pace back and forth all throughout the house. He was opening and closing the windows, looking outside, looking into her backyard, and Christy had no idea what he was doing. She was hoping that he would just hurry up and take or do whatever he was going to do and just leave. Then he asked Christy when her kids were going to get home from school. This time, Christy did lie. She told him 3:45, even though she knew it would be closer to 3:50 or 4 o'clock. At that point, the man told her that he wanted to smoke a cigarette and that he wanted Christy to smoke one too. Very odd, he put a cigarette into Christy's mouth. She told him, "I can't smoke a cigarette without a drink of tea or Coke. I have to have something." He lit Christy's cigarette, and then he made her take a sip of some kind of alcohol that was wrapped in a brown paper bag. Then he continued pacing up and down the halls, smoking a cigarette. Suddenly, he went across the hallway to Christy's oldest daughter's bedroom, Kayla's bedroom, and he started rummaging through her drawers. He found a pair of Kayla's pantyhose and began cutting them up, then stuck them in his pants pocket. When 3:45 came around, the man seemed irritated that Christy's kids were not home yet. He said, "I guess your kids are late." At that point, Christy asked him if he would just do whatever he was going to do and leave before the kids got home. That's when he told her to shut up. Then Christy asked him if he would let her go to the door when the kids arrived and tell them to go to the neighbor's house, and that she would be over to get them in a few minutes. Again, he said no, and then he told Christy to shut up again. When Christy realized that this man wasn't going to leave before her kids got home, she was really scared for them. She didn't want them to come inside and see what was going on. She didn't want them to come in and see their mommy tied up. At that point, Christy didn't ask any more questions. She tried to stay as calm as she could. She didn't want to make this man mad. She was trying not to make the situation worse. 3:50 p.m. came around, and Christy could hear the sound of the school bus pulling up. That's when the man left her room. She couldn't see where he was going. Christy was left on her bed, still bound with the zip ties. A few minutes later, Christy heard the kids come into the house. They were talking about their day, laughing together. Her daughter Kayla was the first she saw coming down the hallway, then Ethan, and then Courtney behind him. When Courtney saw Christy, she said, "Mom, what's going on? Do you want me to untie you?" That's when the man jumped out from behind them, grabbed Courtney, and put her under her head. He forced all 3 of Christy's children into that room with her. He told them to get on the floor and put their hands behind their backs, and all 3 of them did what they were told. They were lying face down on their stomachs. The man began putting zip ties on Kayla's wrists first. When this was happening, little Ethan began to cry, and he spoke up. He asked the man, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this to my mommy?" And he said, "I want to go hug my mommy." Surprisingly, the man said, "Fine, go hug your mommy." So Christy's little 5-year-old son was clinging to her while the man started to tie Courtney's hands behind her back. Then he told Ethan to get up. Ethan asked the man, "Are you going to put handcuffs on me too?" Instead of using zip ties, the man pulled that pair of pantyhose out of his pocket and used them to tie little Ethan's hands behind his back as well. After that, the man took Courtney out of the room first. She had been crying so hard that there were tears pooling on the hardwood floors. He shut the door behind him and then came back and took Kayla out of the room and shut the door behind him again. I can't imagine how scared they were in that moment. The man came back in once again, and this time he went to take Ethan out. Again, this little boy spoke up. He asked the man, "Why are you doing this to mommy? Why are you hurting her? Are you gonna hurt me? I love my mommy." Christy wasn't able to hold back her tears when she heard her son say that. She was sobbing. Christy told Ethan, "I know you do, baby." It did nothing to deter this man. He took Ethan away from Christy and left, shutting the door behind him again. Christy didn't know where this man had taken her children. She was so worried about them. Soon enough, the man was back in Christy's room. He was still really calm. He actually took a seat right next to Christy on the bed and sighed, kind of leaning up against her. He said, "Okay, it's either gonna be you or your daughter." Christy knew exactly what he meant. It was either going to be that he forced Christy to have intercourse with him, or he was going to do it to one of her daughters. She immediately said, "Please let it be me." I'm so sorry that she had to go through this. Sadly, most times these situations don't end well, and the victims usually do not live to tell their stories. The details that I'm about to relate to you through Christy's words are a lot of things. Repulsive, heartbreaking, unbelievable, terrifying. There are so many emotions that you can only imagine. If we feel these things, how awful Christy must have been feeling when she was going through all this. At this point, the man started to kiss Christy on the mouth. He told her to use her tongue or she'd be sorry. Next, he cut the zip ties off Christy's ankles with a knife so he could begin to position her for his first ultimate violation of her body. He pulled Christy's shorts all the way off, got on top of her, and forced her to have intercourse with him. After he was done, he took her into the bathroom and forced her to take a shower to wash away the evidence of semen from her body. After that, he led her back to the bed and sat there for a while without saying a word. But he finally broke his silence to tell Christy that he was going to have to put her out so that she didn't see him leave. Put her out, well, whatever it meant, whether that meant knock her out or kill her. The man suddenly grabbed her around the neck and began to strangle her. It was like he snapped. He had been calm this whole time, and then, just like that, he became a monster. But I think he had always been a monster. Now he was acting more like one than ever. He wouldn't let go of Christy, no matter how much she fought to get away. When strangling her wasn't working, the man tried to break Christy's neck. Christy fought harder, and when this didn't work either, the man threw her down on the bed and began smothering her with a pillow. Then he pulled out a knife and started to cut her neck, not once, but there were 4 different cuts in different directions across the back, and a couple of times on the front, in both directions, from right to left and left to right. It takes a lot of force to cut this part of the body, unless you're using a very sharp instrument. Even some knives can accomplish clean cuts on the throat. Finally, he let her go and dropped her back on the bed. Christy had no idea where he was going or what he was going to do when he left. But then he came back in and started to stab her again. One of the strikes was into her left ear canal. And he wasn't done. He stabbed her in the lower back as she was just lying there, helpless on her bed. Christy didn't know if he was done or if he was just going to keep going. She had no idea what else this man was going to do to her. At this point, Christy decided her best bet to stay alive was to pretend that she was dead. So that's what she did. She lay there as still as possible. When he came back in, he threw a blanket on top of her body. Christy waited a few minutes before she tried to move. She was waiting for the guy to finally leave. She was lying on the right side, with her ear in a pool of her own blood, and her left ear had been stabbed, so she wasn't able to hear anything. However, once she thought the coast was clear, she slowly and carefully lifted her head a bit so she could see from underneath the blanket. That's when she caught a glimpse of Ethan. He was lying in a room across the hallway. He was lying on top of a pile of pillows, and Christy thought that it looked like Ethan was just lying there asleep, like a tired kindergartner who just got home from school. Christy didn't know what to do, but she wanted to save her children. She was nude from the waist down, so she thought to herself, "Okay, I know what I will do. I'll get up, I'll wrap this blanket around me, I'll run over, scoop Ethan up, and then we've got to get out of here." But Christy realized she wasn't going to be able to do that. Her hands were still tied behind her back. She wasn't going to be able to wrap the blanket around her. She wouldn't get the chance anyway. The next thing she knew, the man was back, and he was pouring something onto the floor. He lit a match and set Christy's bedroom on fire. Christy was still afraid to get up. She didn't know where the man went. She was hoping that he had finally left. She was lying there as long as she could, not moving. She was so worried about her children, but the fire started making its way to her bed. Then she felt her right foot was on fire. But to her utter shock and surprise, when Christy tried to move it, she realized she couldn't move her right leg at all. Christy's legs were paralyzed from the deep wounds to her back. Christy had to think fast. The fire was continuing to rage, even larger and more intense. She managed to roll herself off the bed and onto the floor, then rolled towards the French doors that led to the deck in her backyard and down to her above-ground pool. The doors had those lever-type handles, so Christy tried to pull one of the door handles with her foot, but her legs failed her. She tried again, and then she got stuck in the door frame. But somehow she lifted her body and used her foot to push the handle again, and one side of the French door swung open. All the while, her hair was on fire, parts of her skin were burning. The embers falling from the home were landing on her body and all around her, burning her. All she could do was roll, so that's what she did, all the way into her pool. It was such quick thinking on Christy's part, who definitely had the will to survive, especially for her children. At this point, she had no idea where her children were, if they were inside the house or if the man had taken them somewhere. By the time she got out of the house, the entire side that she was on was engulfed in flames. She could hear things popping, cracking, and breaking, and the fire just got hotter and hotter. So much so, she actually had to move to the far side of the swimming pool to get away from the heat. That's when she thought to herself, "I can't believe what just happened." By this time, neighbors had seen the flames. Someone had called 911, as I explained earlier, and now Christy could hear voices on the other side of the house, on the side where her kids' bedrooms were. She was still so worried about them, hoping that the people she could hear had gotten her kids out to safety. Christy tried to yell for help but realized no sound was coming out. Finally, someone came into her backyard and yelled, "We got another one." That's when Christy knew they were going to be saved. She said, "I knew my children were going to be safe. I knew they would get them out." That's when she also recognized a familiar face. It was her friend, Deputy Kenneth Butts. He was the first officer on scene and was right up in Christy's face, trying to help her. That is when he began asking her what happened and who did this to her. Christy told him she did not know the man. The deputy pressed her, asking if she could give a description of what he looked like. Christy told him he was a white man and had been wearing a blue short-sleeve polo shirt with a DirecTV logo on it. The man also wore blue jeans, white Reebok athletic shoes, and had white plastic cable ties and a black handgun. After that, Christy was pulled from the pool, put on a stretcher, and rushed to the hospital where she was saved. Now she was lying in the hospital bed telling this story. I'm sure there was not one dry eye in there, whether they were law enforcement officers just doing their job or not. I'm certain this story evoked emotion in them. Christy was still so shocked and confused, and she still hadn't seen her children. Christy looked around the room, and one of her first questions, of course, was, "Where are my children?" They weren't in the room with her. She couldn't see them. But then one of her friends came forward, John Mark Vincent, the Trigg County coroner. He looked at Christy and said, "We've been telling you that your children are in good hands because they are, but they didn't make it." Christy said, "What do you mean they didn't make it?" She was devastated. She began crying. Everyone in that room was crying too, and they started hugging her. During those days while she was in a medically induced coma, Christy had no idea what happened at the scene of the inferno and what the first responders discovered when they got there. This poor woman had already been through so much. To think that her poor children were also dead is so heartbreaking to me. I almost could not read all these details. Going back to the scene, remember Sean Laurie, the brave man who ran into the burning home? Once it got too hot, I told you he ran back out and then went to the windows to see if there was any way that he could get inside a different way or see anyone. That's when he saw a foot, someone's foot, in one of the windows. A foot with a pink sock on it. Sean and other neighbors grabbed a chair and broke the glass, then began to pull the person out of the burning house. It was Kayla. When they grabbed her legs, they were so hot it startled them, so they pulled back. Sadly, when they pulled back, it ripped her skin off into their hands. Can you imagine? Once Kayla was on the ground, away from the house, that's when the neighbors realized her throat had been cut all the way across from ear to ear, deep enough that her trachea was visible. Her legs and arms were still bound with zip ties. She had been gagged with a pair of pantyhose. Karen Walker and another woman began to administer CPR to Kayla, who was miraculously still alive. Karen remembers how Kayla was struggling to breathe, trying so hard to take a breath and gurgling. Deputy Kenneth Butts was there, watching this play out. He knew there was nothing that could be done. The damage to Kayla was too severe. CPR was unsuccessful. When emergency personnel arrived, they put a defibrillator pack on Kayla's heart, but it failed to revive her. Kayla only lived for a few more minutes. Her siblings were still trapped inside the burning house. The fire destroyed the entire home, unfortunately burning Courtney and Ethan's bodies. There was no way for them to be saved. Firefighters from 3 different counties, Linton, Hurden, and Caledonia, were at the scene. They were finally able to put out all the flames by 5:23 p.m. Emergency responders had called Goodwin Funeral Home for the coroner John Mark Vincent to come down. Eventually, Kayla's body was transported to Dr. Deidre Chaluprier, the regional medical examiner for Western Kentucky, for an autopsy. Meanwhile, the state fire marshal's office was contacted to begin an arson investigation to find out the fire's cause and origin. The state police were also involved to investigate Christie's attempted murder. While they awaited the medical examiner's autopsy report for Kayla's cause of death, 1/2 mile of military road, as well as some property surrounding Christie's home, was barricaded off with barrels, cones, and yellow crime scene tape. They wanted to preserve the scene and search for evidence, which included a possible weapon. At this point, no names had been released to the public. After all, Christie's children were minors, and with all 3 deceased and having different families, the notification process was more complicated. It was taking more time, and they would not release any information until Kayla, Courtney, and Ethan's fathers were contacted and notified. However, neighbors knew who lived in that home. They knew with 3 people being left inside the home and Christy at the hospital, it had to be Christy's kids that died. So they were talking to the media right away. They were providing names, even though it was an unofficial record. Newspapers were posting pictures of Kayla, Christy, and Courtney. In less than 48 hours, however, little was known about what happened in that home. There was an issue once the fire was put out. They had to locate and remove Courtney and little Ethan, which would turn out to be a very difficult task. The issue was preservation. Since this was no accident, each victim needed to have an autopsy conducted. If the remains were destroyed, that wouldn't be able to be done. So the state called upon forensic anthropologist Dr. Emily Craig. She arrived on scene to attempt to recover the badly charred bodies of Ethan and Courtney and keep them as intact as possible. That is incredible that this can be done. Dr. Craig explained that the remains and the associated debris in this case were so incredibly fragile that she knew they were only going to get one chance to do it right. But she had come up with a plan. By the next day, Thursday, October 16th, Dr. Craig was at the house to carry out this plan. She carefully and meticulously dug a pathway to the bodies to preserve the crime scene. Ethan was discovered first. There was a lot of debris on top of him, including a bed and a ceiling fan, which were directly on top of his tiny body. Courtney's remains were discovered just 10 feet away from her brother. Now for the even harder task of removing each piece of what was left, mostly skeletal at this point. But the doctor managed to recover both bodies, and they were sent to the medical examiner's office in Madisonville. There, the same doctor who was working on Kayla's autopsy asked Dr. Craig for her assistance in the skeletal examination of Ethan and Courtney, which is what Dr. Craig was an expert in. What a process they had to go through. By Thursday evening, State Police spokesperson Dean Patterson confirmed that Kayla's death had been ruled a homicide. Meanwhile, police and now homicide investigators were canvassing the area, asking neighbors if they had heard or seen anything that day, or any other day that they thought would be important for the investigation. On the day of the crime, all agencies in the area were told they should be on the lookout for a bloody man wearing a DirecTV shirt. One of the volunteer firefighters came forward. His name was Matt Ledford. He was only 18 years old, but he was a close friend of Christy's 17-year-old daughter, Kayla. He had a daily routine of coming by her house, saying hello and seeing what everyone was up to. October 15th was no different. He stopped by Christy's around 4:30 p.m. He parked his car, walked to the front door, and knocked. When no one answered, he opened the door and stepped inside. He said, "I may have stepped inside maybe a foot, a half a foot, that's it." Then he listened to see if he could hear anyone. He didn't, and he didn't even call out or anything because all he could hear was the sound of the swimming pool pump motor. He turned around and left, driving to Hopkinsville, but just as he got into town, he was paged to come out to the fire. He was shocked that it was at Christy's house. As he arrived back there, he was devastated when he saw the body of his close friend, 17-year-old Kayla Williams, lying near the house, lifeless. Matt stayed the scene into the next morning. He only left for about an hour in the middle of the night. Wow, I can't believe that he was there when this maniac was inside that house. If only he would have called out, he said. But how incredibly sad. We honestly do not know if his presence would have made much of a difference. He could have been killed too. However, Matt was able to provide a big lead. He told police that when he pulled up to Christie's that day, there was an unfamiliar vehicle parked in her driveway. It was a champagne-colored 2004 to 2006 extended cab Chevrolet Silverado truck with a trailer hitch. Not only that, Matt remembered the first 3 letters of the license plate. Yep, it was H-E-Y. That's why I remembered it, because it spelled hey. The things that you never know are going to be important, but it was. They had a description of a white man who might work for DirecTV and drove an extended cab truck with a license plate that started with the letters H-E-Y. Now authorities were searching for this vehicle. Meanwhile, Courtney and Ethan's autopsies were underway. Both deaths were ruled homicides. The damage to 5-year-old Ethan's thoracic bones, which I'm probably saying wrong, the vertebrae, the 33 individual interlocking bones that form your spinal column, showed that force had been used during this attack on his body. One of his ribs was completely split in half. These children were brutally murdered. Ethan was stabbed 11 times, with one of the wounds penetrating his heart. His sister, 14-year-old Courtney McBurney, was stabbed at least 4 times. 3 of the wounds were in her chest and 1 in her neck. Just like her sister Kayla, who was also stabbed in the neck along with a slash across her throat. A serrated steak knife had been broken off of the handle during Kayla's attack, and that blade was found inside her sweatshirt. All 3 of these children's deaths were caused by sharp force injuries. They did not die because of the fire. The fire was most likely started in an attempt to destroy the remains and any evidence of the murders. By Friday, military officials were now on the scene. By that time, Ethan's father, Jeff, had been notified of his son's murder, and he was the one who requested the military's presence. By Saturday, the newspaper revealed that Kayla's father was now on his way from California to Kentucky after being contacted, informed, and interviewed about his daughter's murder. Doug said that he was angered after he learned about all of the deaths, He said, "To think that someone went in there and did what they did to all three of those kids. They're an absolute monster, and I hope they find him." He explained that Kayla had recently moved back in with Christy, and that she was the type of girl who would walk into a room and you would think she was an absolute angel. Courtney's father was also interviewed. He defined his relationship with his daughter as distant and said he regretted that. He no longer had a way to reconcile with her. He stated that he hadn't been in her life for a while, but that he really appreciated other family members for spending so much time with her. He added that he didn't see why this happened. There didn't seem to be a reason for a vendetta. It seemed to be a random act of violence. The whole town was heartbroken for these children and their mother. Police spokesperson Patterson told the media that it was probably one of the most horrendous crimes that he'd ever been involved with or known about in that area, but they still did not have a suspect. However, they were following every lead. The biggest one, he told the media, was the apparent association between the killer and DirecTV cable company. Patterson said that the DirecTV corporate office was fully cooperating with the investigation. This information had the town and the surrounding areas on edge. For one thing, residents were apprehensive about any upcoming cable appointments. They didn't want anyone from that company in their homes. Not only that, men who worked for DirecTV felt nervous because now they were being questioned about something that they maybe had no involvement in. People who had loved ones like their husbands, for example, or family members who worked for the company were now kind of looking at them like, could they be involved? You're right if you think that police have been questioning men who worked for the company. They had actually been told to stop any DirecTV vans that were driving in the areas and question the drivers. One local wife and mother of three, Stephanie Dunlap, was keeping up to date on the horrendous crime as it unfolded, not only because she too was a mom, but also because her husband, Kevin, worked for DirecTV. She remembered the day that she heard about the fire when Kevin came home from work on October 15th. He told her that he had just been pulled over and questioned by police. She asked him why, and he said it had something to do with a house fire. Kevin told her that the police were looking for someone that worked for DirecTV, because apparently, according to what he was told, someone saw a DirecTV van around the scene of the fire. But really, it was a DirecTV shirt that Christy had seen the killer wearing. Nonetheless, this was what was being relayed to people as they were being stopped by police. Kevin, of course, drove a company van during the weekdays, and he said that a bunch of his coworkers had been pulled over that day. Stephanie thought, wow, this is really serious. At that point, not much was being said in the media, and Kevin said that the cops just asked him some questions and then sent him on his way. A couple of days later, Stephanie saw the newspaper article for the first time. The headline read, "3 children dead after house fire." Stephanie couldn't help feeling so bad for that poor family. She thought about how awful it was that they weren't able to get out of that burning house. Stephanie, just like Christy, had 3 children. Her oldest daughter, Bruck, was 13, Kevin Jr. was 11, and little Aiden was only 3 at the time. So it hit close to home for her. It was so heartbreaking for those little ones to lose their lives so young. It was hard for Stephanie not to be invested in the case. It's also a small town, so of course it's what everyone was talking about. Plus, Kevin was directly related because he worked for a company that was supposedly connected somehow. Or maybe it wasn't, since it wasn't really a van, just a shirt. The police didn't know if the fact that the guy was wearing the DirecTV shirt had any relevance. He could be a former employee, or he could have even gotten the shirt at a garage sale or thrift store. Who knows? No one knew for sure, but they were close to finding out. Although the authorities were staying tight-lipped, they were running with an even bigger lead: the license plate number they had been given for Matt Ledford. From just those first 3 letters, they were able to narrow their search to a specific county where the vehicle was registered. Once they tracked it down and got the information related to the vehicle, it matched the description Matt had given, a Chevy Silverado. At that point, they had the name and address of the owner, and when they did a background check, they found out that the man worked for a company called Rooster & Associates, which turned out to be an independent cable installation contractor. This company had employees who installed and serviced satellite systems for none other than DirecTV in Kentucky. But they were onto something here. Things were adding up. The dots were connecting. Their prime suspect was born in Texas, but had lived in Hopkinsville, Kentucky for most of his life, and had served in the U.S. Army for more than 13 years, from 1989 to 2002. After being released from the Army, he joined and served in the Kentucky National Guard in Hopkinsville for 2 years. He had been honorably discharged from the elite 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, known as the Night Stalkers. He was a helicopter mechanic and was now working full-time installing satellites for DirecTV. The house at the address related to this vehicle registration was a modest one-story brick home with a horseshoe driveway that sat on the corner of Cox Mill Road and Sterling Drive in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. It was a 25-minute drive to Christie's house from this location, so investigators wondered what the connection might be. They located the suspect at his place of employment and began to follow him. Starting on that Friday evening, they planned to raid his home the next day, Saturday, October 18th, just 3 days after the murder. They were just waiting on a search warrant and arrest warrant. A DirecTV utility van could be seen parked in the driveway out front of the house that night, and a Chevy Silverado was parked on the other side of the home. By Sunday morning, there were now 2 DirecTV vans outside in the horseshoe driveway, and the SWAT team and several police officers were standing by in unmarked vehicles. They were waiting for a woman and children to leave the premises. As soon as they got the go-ahead with the warrants, they converged on the home. A small explosion was used as a diversionary tactic, and the police set this off before they made their way inside the home to make an arrest. That same day, Stephanie Dunlap had just dropped her 2 older children, Bruck and Kevin Jr., over at their neighbor's house to run some errands with her 3-year-old Aiden, when a neighbor called her to let her know that something was going on. In their usually quiet neighborhood, you know how word travels fast. She said they just heard a loud bang and brought their children inside the house from playing outside. Stephanie rushed back over to the neighbors to make sure the kids were okay, and that's when she saw it. There was a police car parked outside her house. She went over and asked what was going on, and they informed her that her husband, Kevin Wayne Dunlap, had just been arrested. Stephanie had no idea what was going on. 2 investigators showed up right after this and asked her if she knew why they were there. She told them, "No, I have no idea." She was told that her husband had been arrested in connection to the house fire in Roaring Springs that occurred on October 15th. She did not understand. Her mind was racing. She said she was just sitting there trying to understand how her husband could be in any way connected to a house fire. That is when the detectives began to calmly explain to Stephanie that it wasn't just a house fire. The 3 children who had died had been murdered. Their mother had been tied up and sexually violated, and then almost killed. The house was set on fire, but the mother managed to escape by rolling outside into her swimming pool. She was an eyewitness, and the evidence that she and other residents provided to authorities led them to suspect that Stephanie's husband, Kevin, was responsible for this crime. As you can probably imagine, Stephanie was in total shock. She never for 1 second even considered that her own husband would be involved in anything like this. Everything was in slow motion. Stephanie could hardly breathe. One of the things she thought of was that if he did this, then he came home that night, ate dinner with her as a family, and then slept right next to her in bed. It was unfathomable. Could he have really done such a thing? She didn't think he was capable of such evil. She had been married to him for 13 years. By 1 p.m. Saturday afternoon, 36-year-old Kevin Wayne Dunlap had been formally charged with 3 counts of capital murder, 3 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, 1 count of attempted murder, first-degree sexual battery, first-degree burglary, and arson. These charges would be enhanced because a firearm had been used during the commission of the crime. State Police Detective Jerry Jones booked Dunlap into the Christian County Jail in Hopkinsville at 4:34 p.m. that afternoon. Meanwhile, the investigators were scouring the Dunlap home and Kevin's vehicles, including his DirecTV work van, looking for evidence, The Silverado was towed to a crime lab for analysis, and the other DirecTV van that was parked outside the home belonged to Kevin's coworker, who was actually inside when the house was raided. Both of the men were escorted outside in handcuffs, surrounded by officers, and questioned. Once Kevin was identified, the other man was let go, as he was not involved in the crime. Stephanie didn't know what to think. She did not believe her husband was guilty. When she went to the jail to visit him, she asked him, "Why do they think you committed this crime?" She thought he was going to explain it to her, but he just said it was nothing. She asked, "What do you mean it's nothing? They're saying you killed 3 children." He didn't give his wife an explanation or anything, so she didn't know what to believe. Kevin was a father, a husband. Why would he do this? Well, that's what police wanted to know, and of course they wanted to interview those closest to Kevin. Here is the information Stephanie provided about her and Kevin's life together. Stephanie was born and raised in Hopkinsville. She was actually introduced to Kevin through some of her neighbors when she was still in high school. He was 5 years older than her, and his demeanor had always been very gentle and kind. She and Kevin were just friends until later on when Stephanie turned 18. He was 23, and they began dating. At the time, she had a 3-month-old child from a previous relationship. Her oldest daughter, Bruck, was treated by Kevin as though she was his own child. Stephanie and Kevin got married 9 months after they started dating, on December 29, 1995. The 3 of them became a family and did everything together. Kevin was a hard worker in the military, and they were very happy. Stephanie was in love. Over time, they discussed wanting a bigger family, and after about a year and a half together, in 1997, Stephanie gave birth to a baby boy they named Kevin Jr. after his father. Then little Aiden followed about 3 years later. Stephanie said the marriage was normal until it wasn't. Things started to change. Kevin became angry towards the children, seemingly for no reason at all. The first change that Stephanie saw was the way Kevin was treating Stephanie's daughter Bruck, the one that she and Kevin did not have together, but that he raised since she was born. To Stephanie's surprise, Kevin began to be hypercritical of the littlest things Bruck was doing. One example was at dinner one night. Kevin was glaring at Bruck while she was eating. Mind you, this is a little girl, she's a child. But Kevin started aggressively telling Bruck she was holding her spoon wrong. It wasn't the way that Kevin thought it should be held. This poor little girl sat there trying her best to get it right. But no matter how hard her little fingers tried to readjust to his demands, she couldn't do it the way he wanted. It got to a point where Kevin got physical. This was a turning point. Sure, Kevin had been strict and critical in the past, but now he had taken it to the next level. Even worse, if Bruck shed one tear, Kevin would yell, "I'll give you something to cry about." Another thing was food itself. Bruck was required to eat every crumb of food whether she liked it or not, and she couldn't move away from the table until she was done. Sometimes she would have to sit there for hours. So you may wonder, where was Stephanie through all this? She was scared if she fought back and something were to happen to her, there wouldn't be anyone to protect her. Stephanie said she felt the same way. Stephanie had to wait until Kevin went to bed or was taking a shower, then she would come to Bruck's rescue, throwing away all the old food and making sure to cover it up in the garbage so Kevin wouldn't see it. Then she would tell Bruck to go show Kevin that she was done. If she didn't finish, she would get spanked, and many times that's exactly what happened if Stephanie didn't help her. Stephanie had to smooth things over. What's hard about all this is that there were happy times in between these moments of fear and pain. It was a vicious cycle of push and pull. Stephanie and Bruck both said they looked happy, especially from the outside. Family photos did not show what went on behind closed doors. Kevin became very focused on causing his family pain. His next victim was Stephanie. Sadly, he involved the children in his torture. Not all of us are going to understand this, but Stephanie had a phobia of people touching her feet. Listen, we own our bodies. If something makes us feel uncomfortable, others should respect that and our boundaries. But someone like Kevin used that fear against Stephanie. He pretended it was all in good fun. A game for the kids to play. Let's tickle mommy's feet. So all four of them would gang up on Stephanie as she screamed and told them to please stop. But the kids would follow Kevin's lead until he'd had enough, until he got bored with it, leaving Stephanie feeling helpless and defeated. The kids would listen to Kevin because they were scared of him. He seemed to find pleasure in other people's pain, and things got worse, not better, as the years went on. Kevin became a loose cannon. His family never knew when he was about to blow up. One afternoon, Kevin came home from work. As soon as he got through the door, he demanded to know where Stephanie was. He asked Bruck, "Where's your mother?" Stephanie had been napping. Kevin, for no reason, barged into the bedroom and grabbed Stephanie's hair, pulling her off the bed. Being awakened this way was shocking, to say the least. She had no idea why Kevin was so agitated. That word, remember, the word agitated heaven. Kevin was just throwing Stephanie around the room, hitting her head against the wall and tossing her like a rag doll. All the while, she was crying and telling him to stop. The kids were witnessing this entire ordeal, but he wouldn't stop. He grabbed her, forced her all the way down the hallway as she continued kicking and screaming. The kids were scared, and Kevin started screaming at Stephanie to leave, to get out of his house. He was throwing her outside, but since she knew that Kevin cared about what other people thought, Stephanie figured that if people were around, she would be safer. So she was glad to be outside. She didn't know what she had done to deserve this. She just kept apologizing over and over to him. This was the first time the kids had witnessed Kevin treating their mother this way. Then, as quickly as it started, he would just stop, leaving Stephanie bruised and beaten. But he was the man she loved. Let's try hard not to judge Stephanie too quickly for not leaving. I know some of us may wonder why she didn't just leave him. It wasn't that simple. Even as a child, Bruck wondered why Stephanie would let Kevin treat her this way. She knew it wasn't right, and of course, Bruck had experienced it for herself. Bruck wondered why Stephanie seemed to allow this to happen, and Stephanie explained it was because of her fears. Soon, Kevin began getting physical with Stephanie more and more, but he would always strategically bruise her in places that she could cover with clothing. Stephanie considered reporting Kevin to the police, but she was so scared of what would happen to her or the children if he retaliated. It was a very dangerous situation to be in. At the same time, Stephanie had another job, working hard to make sure her family looked as perfect as possible from the outside. All the family photos, the activities they did together, it all became a facade. Kevin would also be a perfect angel when his mother was around. He acted like a really great husband and father, but it wasn't true. The family was always walking on eggshells around him, and they were pretty good at knowing what would set him off. So the quieter they were, the less trouble they would get into. Stephanie just kept her head down, stayed in college, and knew if she found a way to support herself, she could finally leave Kevin for good one day and be able to take care of the kids on her own. Things reached a whole new level of fear when Kevin started bringing guns into the home. Stephanie was terrified. She had this person who blew up out of nowhere, and now he had more than just his fists as weapons. But Kevin insisted the firearms were just there to protect the family. However, one afternoon, he turned one of those guns on his children. It wasn't a gun full of bullets. It was a pellet gun. The kids actually never told Stephanie at the time. She found out much later. Bruck and Kevin Jr. were in the living room one afternoon when Kevin broke out his pellet gun and began shooting at them. These pellets are made of metal. They burn your skin. Kevin acted like it was funny watching his children squirm. The kids started screaming and telling him to stop, but he just yelled back, "Shut up," and kept laughing all the while as his kids screamed in pain. Then he just turned around and walked out. This next part really terrified and disgusted me. It was Halloween one year, and just like in the years before, Stephanie went out and bought Halloween candy, including Kevin's favorite kind. While Stephanie was at work one day, she helped herself to a few pieces of Kevin's candy. When he got home, he noticed there weren't as many pieces as before, and was furious, yelling, "Who ate my candy?" Stephanie was so scared that he would think it was the kids when it was really her, so she quickly told him, "It was me. It was me. I'm sorry." Mind you, this woman went out and purchased the candy for him. It's so twisted how in his mind he has such entitlement and claim over something as trivial as Halloween candy. But Kevin was in a rage. He had to teach Stephanie a lesson. No one eats his candy. Stephanie kept apologizing and telling him, "It's okay, I'll buy you more." But Kevin actually took out a real gun this time and pointed it at Stephanie. She was shocked. She asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "How dare you eat my candy?" Then he told her how easy it would be for him to end her life. He wanted her never to touch his things again. His things. Stephanie was begging for her life at this point, over some candy. It's frightening to think that a person holding a gun actually has a twisted mindset where they believe this behavior is warranted. That's the scariest part because you don't know how far they will take it. Stephanie, you just told him she'd never do it again. She repeated her apology over and over until he finally released her. Not only did he walk away, but he didn't talk to Stephanie for 2 whole months. She tried to make normal conversation with her husband, asking him about his day. In domestic situations like this, it's common for the person in control to punish a victim. The silent treatment is one very typical way that they do it. The message they're sending is, "You're not even worth my breath." Stephanie was still sleeping in the same bed, yet this man ignored her. He acted like he had pulled that trigger that day, and that she was dead. But it was also the things Kevin did choose to say that made it hard for Stephanie to leave. Things about how stupid she was, how she wasn't good at anything, how she was worthless, and how she would never be able to survive on her own. There are many ways people try to gain control over others, and one is with their words. Sometimes it's with actual control over something like finances, for example. After years of being told she was worthless, Stephanie started to believe it. She really felt trapped. She felt like she had to stay with Kevin and that there was no way out. She kept thinking maybe Kevin would see the light one day, maybe he would change for the better. But that wasn't the case. It usually isn't. It did seem to get better though. Kevin stopped being physical with her, but he was hardly around. He began distancing himself from everyone, spending a lot more time by himself, locked up in his man cave, as Stephanie put it. No one knew what he was doing in there. It was a room above their garage in the house. Kevin seemed to sleep less and less and spend more time locked in this room. He wouldn't even eat with his family anymore, which honestly was good for them. No more worrying about holding utensils correctly or being forced to eat when you're already full. They were kind of happy he wasn't around as much. Kevin would go straight to his private room as soon as he came home from work. Stephanie was relieved. She didn't have to deal with him as much anymore. The household was so much calmer. The kids were also getting older, and they would be gone doing their own activities, so Stephanie enjoyed her time alone. She wouldn't even question or care about what Kevin was doing, as long as he wasn't bothering her. She felt good about him keeping to himself. There were times when Kevin wouldn't even come to bed. Some nights, he would be up doing whatever he was doing, unbeknownst to anyone else in the house. Stephanie wouldn't be able to tell if he had left the home either, because he would go right out the garage. Unbelievably, in August of 2004, Kevin and Stephanie actually separated. Perhaps that time alone helped Kevin feel as though it was okay if she left. Stephanie filed for divorce on September 20th, 2004. At this time, Kevin was unemployed. He was attending Hopkinsville Community College and receiving $950 a month through the GI Bill for college and another $813 a month in VA disability benefits. While the court proceedings took place, Kevin and Stephanie agreed to the terms for the custody agreement and other details, like what Kevin would be paying for child support. But, less than a year later, by July 12, 2005, the divorce was dismissed because Kevin and Stephanie decided to stay together. Maybe the time apart brought back fond memories of better times. I don't know. But what I do know is that there were signs that things were not better. Stephanie explained that one night there was a violent storm outside. It woke her up. She noticed that Kevin was not in bed beside her. She wondered where he was, and this time she went looking for him. Where she found him frightened, confused, and disgusted her. She found him in her daughter Bruck's bedroom, in her bed. Of course, Stephanie immediately woke him up. She told him to get up and asked Bruck, who was now awake and confused, why her dad was in bed with her. He hadn't been there when she fell asleep, and it scared her. She was also wondering why her mom was so angry. I think we know why. This was highly inappropriate. Stephanie knew it was something more than Kevin accidentally getting into the wrong bed, and that was concerning. Had he done something to Bruck? No one knew. Bruck said he very well could have, and she could have blocked it out. All she knows is she was never afraid of thunder before that night, but now she was. Kevin had been drinking earlier in the evening, so Stephanie was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he did just kind of wander in there and pass out. All Bruck knew was that now, when she heard thunder, she curled up into a ball and cried, something she hadn't done before this. But now it was a triggered response. Kevin began working again, and he had several jobs, finally landing a job installing satellite TV. Stephanie told the police that she remembers one night, around 9 p.m., she noticed Kevin was kind of getting ready as if he was going somewhere. She was confused. He had his DirecTV uniform on. This time she asked him where he was going. She already knew there was no way he was going to work. She actually thought he was cheating, so she figured, you know what, let me see what excuse he gives me. Kevin told her, without even missing a beat, that he had a call to go install a satellite system. She kind of snapped back at him, saying, "Really, this late?" He responded, "Well, one of us in this house needs to work," insulting Stephanie as usual. She knew he was lying, but she let him think that she was stupid enough to believe him. They didn't get calls at night to install satellite TV, not that late. Stephanie wasn't stupid, but she let it go. When she noticed how long he was gone that night, she was really concerned. She thought, wow, he's living a double life, probably with some other woman. Not too long after this late-night secret outing, Stephanie came home with the kids one afternoon to see a large amount of blood on their living room floor. She didn't have much time to think about it, because she saw Kevin sitting there, holding his hand. It was gushing blood, and Stephanie, in a panic, said, "Oh my God, what happened?" It was a serious cut. Kevin said he cut his hand open while he was working on his truck. Stephanie knew they would need to leave for the emergency room. There was no way this cut was going to stop bleeding without medical intervention. Stephanie just kept wondering why he didn't call her immediately and tell her what happened so that they could get him to the ER faster. Stephanie rushed to get Kevin to the hospital, and once they got there, a doctor started to check out his hand. It was a bad cut, like I said. Of course, they asked Kevin, as they do with every patient, "Tell us what happened here." Kevin explained what he already said to Stephanie. He cut it while he was working on his truck. The doctor looked a little puzzled. He questioned Kevin about his answer, kind of challenging him by saying, "Really? You did this on your truck?" The tone of the doctor's voice indicated disbelief. Kevin repeated, "Yes, that's how it happened." The doctor responded that he was surprised because it was such a clean cut. Stephanie, sitting there quietly and taking it all in, thought the term clean meant it didn't have dirt in it, which was why the doctor was confused. But really, that's not it. In medical terms, and specifically forensic medical terminology, when a cut is clean, it came from a source that can make an even or clean slice. Instruments that create clean cuts are usually very sharp, like knives, whereas a cut that's more jagged could be created by a lot more instances than a perfect one. When doctors see cuts like this, they're trained to alert authorities because they could be looking for a suspect involved in a crime, including a sharp force injury. Accidental cuts are not as precise as wounds that are very clean across and show cleanly divided edges, and may involve different types of tissue with the same contact all the way through, just like one swipe. Kevin did not like being questioned by this doctor, and soon there were a couple of police officers standing in his room. Stephanie was very surprised by the way Kevin was reacting to their presence. The officers just asked him what was going on and told him to explain what happened to his hand again. He told them he cut it on his vehicle and asked why it mattered. He came off very defensive. The officers were like, "Okay, calm down. We're just asking necessary questions here." That's when Kevin kind of snapped back and said something to the effect of, "Why are you acting like I'm lying?" The officers tried to calm him down by explaining that they were just trying to make sure of a number of things. One, that it wasn't someone else who cut him, and that he and his family were safe. Maybe he got into a fight and the person cut him while he was trying to defend himself. It's just their job. Agitated. That's how Stephanie chose to describe Kevin in this instance. She said that she saw him begin to get agitated, and she was familiar with this reaction. When the officers finally left, she did not dare inquire about why it agitated him so much. All they were doing was questioning him. She was scared that he would get more agitated. Stephanie saw the signs. He was beginning to feel the pressure and could be set off at any moment, so she knew when to stay silent. The medical professionals took care of Kevin's cut, and they went back home. It was not too long after this incident that Stephanie found out about the fire in Roaring Spring. She saw that article in the newspaper and remembered Kevin coming home that day and saying he had been pulled over and questioned by police. But he seemed to think it wasn't that big of a deal. Now her husband was sitting in a jail cell. Stephanie knew that Kevin was capable of getting physical with his own family, but she couldn't imagine him having any reason to hurt other people. It just didn't make sense to her. It didn't have to. Sometimes these things never make sense to people who don't think like a killer. But Stephanie did remember something that stood out to her. A couple of nights after she read about the fires in the newspaper, her daughter Bruck had a friend spend the night. They were having fun, watching movies on the couch, and then they made little beds out in the living room, just like most teenagers do during a sleepover. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to Stephanie. But what she didn't know until later was that Brooke's friend woke up in the middle of the night to see Kevin standing in the living room, staring out the window into the darkness outside. Then, he was pacing back and forth over and over again, as though he was waiting, watching, and acting nervous and scared. Brooke's friend was scared enough that she thought she should say something because it was unsettling. After police arrested Kevin, they sat him down for questioning, and he denied having anything to do with the crime. In his words, he told investigators that he would deny it until the day he died, and that he had nothing to do with it. Well, that's not what investigators thought. They already had their minds made up, and there were solid reasons for that. I'll get to those in just a moment. So they pressed him. One investigator straight up asked Kevin, "Was it an urge? Did it just overwhelm you to do this?" Because as I explained, people who are thinking clearly don't do this. They don't hurt people this way. We want to make sense of the senseless. Kevin just answered with, "I didn't do it," and his arms stayed tightly crossed. He was still wearing his blue DirecTV shirt that he had been arrested in. The investigator didn't back down. He said, "You just showed up in their driveway and went in there and killed them all randomly." They were still trying to make the connection between Kevin and Christy's family at this time. Kevin responded with, "I didn't do anything." He was so calm in this interview. He kept a straight face and was pretty believable. But investigators knew they had their man, so they asked him if he was just going to keep denying this. Kevin said, "Yes, absolutely. I'm going to deny it. I had nothing to do with this." Kevin's pretty convincing, but the evidence doesn't lie. We already know Kevin's Silverado was seen at the crime scene at 4:30 p.m. If he had never been in Roaring Spring, then what was his truck doing in Christie's driveway? Not only that, going back through Kevin's history with his wife Stephanie and the background checks, it was revealed that not only had Kevin been to Roaring Spring before, he had lived there with his family. That is unreal. This man's still trying to deny it. In the fall of 2004, during the time that Stephanie and him were going through their divorce, the Dunlap family was living at 11 Compton Road in Roaring Spring. This was literally 6 houses away from Christy and her family. The proximity of Kevin's former home to the Friendley residence raised the possibility that at the very least, Kevin had seen Christy and her kids before, or their kids could have even played together. The two homes were less than 2/10 of a mile apart. Now let's go to the evidence found at Kevin's residence. The state police crime lab technicians took 21 swabs of suspected blood from that home, including a pair of white Reebok sneakers that appeared to have dried blood on them, and perhaps some ash or soot. These were the exact style shoes that Christy reported the killer was wearing. Police also seized rope, cable ties, several blue polo-style shirts bearing the DirecTV logo, 2 handguns, and copies of DirecTV work orders for October 15th that were thrown in the trash. When presented with this evidence, Kevin finally said that he did have a service order down there approximately 2 weeks before the killings, but he still denied being there on the day of the crime. All the suspected blood that the investigators found on Kevin's shoes and in his truck had to be tested. Meanwhile, they put Kevin into a lineup with pictures of 5 other men and showed these pictures to Christy. They asked her if she could identify the man that attacked her that day. She really examined the photos. She wasn't confident that she could pick out the person who killed her family because, even though she said he resembled the man she saw, she couldn't say with 100% certainty because his hairstyle was a little bit different. It looked like he was trying to cover his hair with his hand in the photo. Christy was also healing from such a traumatic event, losing all of her children and almost dying. She did choose Kevin out of the lineup, but she couldn't be 100% certain it was him. 11 days after Christy almost lost her life, she was finally leaving the hospital to attend her children's funeral. Goodwin Funeral Home coordinated the combined funeral service for all 3 victims: Ethan Friendley, only 5 years old, and his sisters Courtney McBurney Friendley, 14, and Kayla Williams, 17. Because of the potential for so many people to be in attendance, they decided to have it at the Trigg County High School gymnasium, with the actual burial scheduled for October 31st at the Rose Hill Cemetery in Mason. Christy Friendley sat in a wheelchair in front of the 3 caskets that belonged to her children. I think I owe it to this mother to read her words, just as she had a friend do at this funeral. She was unable to get the words out herself. I'm sure you can imagine how hard it was. It was too hard, so a friend read what Christy wrote in tribute to her children, who were gone too soon. I'm going to read that to you. Every life tells a story. Each life has an introduction, that's the day we were born, a plot, that's the life we live, and a conclusion, our death. Some are short stories, some are full-length novels, and some stories barely have time to introduce the characters before they end. My life story began the day I was born, and my favorite 3 chapters tell of the days that my children, Kayla, Courtney, and Ethan, were born, and I became their mother. When we began our life together as a family, our story has been filled with laughter, fun, adventure, challenges, lots of hugs and kisses, happy times with our friends and family, and plenty of drama, as life will be, living with 2 teenagers and a little kindergartner. Some of you attending today are family and close friends of ours. Many of you here are classmates, teachers, and friends with my children. Kayla, Courtney, and Ethan have been a part of your life story. Since many of you are still in school, you should remember the questions to ask when you read and try to understand a story. Who, what, when, where, and how. Today I want to look at this chapter of my life story and the life story of my children, and try to get some answers to questions not only I, but I know you are asking. Who? Who is God, and why did He let this happen to me and my children? God is who He is, not what we want or try to make Him to be. He's not a Santa Claus who writes down a wish list and gives Christians what they want. He never promised that He would protect us from the problems while we're here on this earth. If that were true, everyone would sign up for Him. He will not shelter us from life's troubles, but He will be there with us through them. Where are my children now? All 3 of my children are together and in heaven. I did not lose them. I know where they are. They are alive, completely safe, and perfectly happy. They have beautiful new bodies, and they're waiting for me. What do I do with the anger and rage I feel towards the man who abused my children and me in ways too horrific to describe and left us to die? I know it will be a process for me, but I choose not to give in to hate. If I allow myself to be chained to hate, I will again become his prisoner, and I cannot and will not allow him to have any more control over my life. I just want justice to the fullest extent of the law, and I know that one day my God will judge him for what he has done to our family, and that will be a fearful thing. When will I see my children again? I don't know, but God knows, and He has promised me from His word that I will see them again in heaven. And when we're reunited, there will never be another separation. How am I going to live with this pain and loneliness now that my reason for living aside from my life with Christ is gone? My answer to that is, I don't know. All I know is that God will give me strength to go on, and He's already comforting me by reminding me that the separation from my children is temporary. I also know that God kept me alive for a reason, and I must find that reason. I know Kayla, Courtney, and Ethan want me to go on. The final chapter has been written in the story of my children's lives on earth, but a new story has just begun for them now in heaven with my beautiful Savior. In closing, I know that if Kayla, Courtney, and Ethan could speak to us today, there are a few things they would want to say. 1. We know you will miss us, but please go on. Life is so short and we will only be separated temporarily. 2. Do not give in to hate, bitterness, or fear. We know you're struggling to cope with our death. Get help, read the Bible, go to church, get counseling. 3. Evaluate your life and invest in things that really count, because you don't know when your final chapter on earth will be written. 4. Accept Christ as your Savior, as we did. You know we weren't perfect kids, but God didn't expect that from us. 5. Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends, we love you so much. Thank you for everything you've done for us. See you soon. Christy ended by telling everyone, thank you so much for your prayers and support. Wow, I'm sure there was not one dry eye in that gymnasium. I can see why Christy couldn't read that. It was very emotional. About 800 people, including relatives, attended the visitation and funeral. Many of them were classmates and other children from their community. They all walked by the closed caskets one last time to say goodbye. A teacher, classmates, and ministers spoke during the funeral. Pictures of the children and home videos of them were shown on 2 big screens above their caskets, and 3 candles on the gym stage burned throughout the service. Kayla and Courtney had white caskets, and Ethan had a small John Deere green casket that sat between his sisters. Crying could be heard throughout the entire gymnasium, especially when they showed a home movie with Ethan singing the song, Last Dollar, Fly Away, by Tim McGraw. When you listen to that song, think of these children. Kayla played the guitar, and Courtney used the kitchen table as a drum. The first verse of that song is, 1, 2, 3, like a bird I sing, because you've given me the most beautiful wings. Rest in peace, Courtney, Ethan, and Kayla. They were laid to rest, but now justice had to be done. The grand jury heard the evidence that investigators found, the blood on a door handle and a seatbelt. The prosecution said they would seek the death penalty. Kevin pleaded not guilty. The bail was set at $3 million, $1 million for each victim that he had killed. There was enough probable cause and circumstantial evidence presented to get an indictment. Now the real investigation had to take place. They were in waiting mode. It could take weeks, even months, for blood and semen to be tested. The trial was moved out of Cadiz and into a neighboring county, Livingston. There were many pre-trial hearings, as there are with every case of its kind. Christy did not come to many of them, but she was at the pre-trial conference in April of 2009 as the trial approached, which was set for November. Here's a picture of her looking at Kevin as he was escorted out of the courtroom that day. If you look closely, you can see the scars on her neck. She was having to see Kevin in court, and that was really hard on her, but she had to be strong for her children. The evidence was still being tested at this point to get ready for trial. There were suppression hearings because, of course, the prosecution was trying to get certain statements admitted that the defense didn't want, like a statement that Kevin made when the officer showed up at his house, when they were trying to effectuate the arrest, and asked him whether he knew why they were there. He said something to the effect of, "Is it about the Roaring Springs deal? Or the Roaring Spring thing?" This was before he was read his Miranda warnings. Miranda rights stem from the Fifth Amendment in the United States Constitution, and many of us are familiar with the statement. It starts with, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, one will be appointed to you." The wording can be slightly different depending on the jurisdiction, but Miranda rights were created in 1966 as a result of the United States Supreme Court case Miranda versus Arizona. The Miranda warning is intended to protect the suspect's Fifth Amendment right to refuse to answer self-incriminating questions. It's all about preserving evidence that can be used at trial. That's why we call it pleading the Fifth, because it's the Fifth Amendment. Just because someone is arrested doesn't mean they're guilty of a crime. That has to be proven. But when they're being questioned in relation to a crime, a suspect will be read a warning that essentially says, if you talk after this, we're going to use your words against you in court. In this case, the prosecution wanted to admit Kevin's 5-hour interview, plus what he said at the door, and they were fighting about this being admitted or not. Ultimately, Judge Woodall said he was not going to allow the statement Kevin made when police came to the door, but the statements during his interview were admissible. With the trial approaching, the defense, of course, filed to delay it so they could do their own independent testing of all the evidence, and because Kevin was undergoing mental health testing. I mention this because there's going to be a bombshell dropped very soon, and I want to highlight what was going on here. The judge granted the delay, especially because this was a death penalty case. It was pushed from November 2009 to February 2010. Let me tell you what was going on behind the scenes, because it was shocking. First of all, Stephanie finally decided to believe that her husband was capable of committing this crime, especially when he wouldn't answer her about why they thought he did it. He said that everything would come out at trial, so she took that as him admitting he did it. They eventually got a divorce. I wanted to mention that Bruck was having a hard time dealing with everything. So finally, Stephanie made a decision to let her know that Kevin was not her biological father. All those years, she actually had no idea that she had no blood relation to this man who raised her since she was a baby. It was actually a huge relief when Bruck sat down with her therapist and her mother, and the truth was revealed to her. She still considered Kevin her father, but it did relieve her to know she did not share his blood. I want to go back to criminals because they have rights. People who are accused of crimes have rights, and our judicial system takes those rights very seriously. Kevin was sent to Kentucky Correctional Psychiatric Center for a 30-day evaluation of his competency to stand trial. A month later, it was found that he was competent. However, just a month before the trial was set to begin, something huge happened that would make this case very unique. Kevin's court-appointed attorney, James Gibson, actually asked the court for an indefinite delay. They needed this for additional testing. The judge responded with this quote, "At a risk of sounding flippant, you need to tell them to hurry up." But Gibson argued it was better to have a fair trial than a fast one, all the while knowing there was something really important that they needed to get to the bottom of without giving it away just yet. While the defense attorney tried to get the judge off the case when he had denied this other delay, he cited a conflict of interest. Remember, Woodall actually presided over the divorce between Christy and Jeff Friendley just months before the murders occurred, but Woodall declined to recuse himself, saying that that case had no bearing and no effect on this one. Yes, it's true he did decide to grant Christy custody of Ethan just 15 days before he was ultimately murdered, but he presumed Kevin innocent until proven guilty, just like with every other case. He also thought this was a pretty bad tactic of the defense, but maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Well, just a month before the trial, the Kentucky Correctional Psychiatric Center did a CT scan on Kevin's brain as part of his medical and mental health evaluation, and it raised some pretty serious concerns, ones that the defense had to bring to the judge. This is what the scan found, and I'm probably not going to pronounce this right. They found 2 non-specific hyperintense punctate foci on Kevin's right frontal lobe. So if there are any doctors or soon-to-be doctors, medical students, and you want to comment, please do. But basically how I understood it in easy-to-understand terms, they scanned his brain and noticed an abnormality, and they wanted to do further testing to find out what it was. Because the frontal lobe of the brain controls judgment, self-control, inhibition, and social interaction, it's a very important part of your brain. Your brain's frontal lobe is the home to areas that manage thinking, emotions, and personality. So it was definitely relevant to have further testing done on Kevin to see what was going on. The defense filed a motion for a complete neurological examination, including an MRI and a PET scan. The judge did approve the request for these exams, but he would not delay the trial. Just as the jury selection was beginning and everyone was there, including Christy and both Doug Williams and Jeffrey Friendley, the fathers of Kayla and Nathan, The judge read the charges and asked Kevin what his plea was. To everyone's surprise, and against the advice of his attorneys, Kevin pleaded guilty to all charges. Judge Woodall asked Kevin why he was pleading this way, and he said he thought it was the right thing to do. Now, because this next part is intense, I want to tell you, apparently Kevin tried to plead guilty but mentally ill, and the judge rejected that plea. However, in the background of all this, what was happening was a clinical neuropsychologist was set to testify about lesions on Kevin's brain that were found when they did the scans. Dr. Michael Nicholas explained that these lesions were a collection of blood vessels about the size of a cubic inch in the frontal lobe of Kevin's brain. Parts of the cortex, the thinking part of the brain, and the white matter, the communicating part of the brain, were actually missing in this section, which ultimately meant that Kevin could experience things like headaches, depression, and more importantly, it could impair his judgment or cause him to lose control. The prosecution asked Dr. Nicholas why nothing was found when he did his initial evaluation, and he explained that, as a matter of fact, he took note that Kevin's personality did not match the personalities of people who usually commit these types of crimes. That's why he wanted to have him further tested, saying that his personality was different. Well, then the prosecutor argued that people who suffer from depression do not usually commit these types of crimes either. Maybe that wasn't the best argument, but guess what? Ultimately, Judge Woodall accepted Kevin's guilty plea and moved to the next phase, which would determine whether Kevin would be sentenced to life or face the death penalty. Having heard statements from both sides, the judge ruled that he didn't think Kevin was mentally ill, and therefore the plea was going to stand. Kevin understood the charges against him, and he was giving clear statements to the court. Now for the penalty phase. This picture was snapped of Kevin talking to one of the assistant defense attorneys on his defense team during jury selection for the penalty phase. I just wanted to show you, he's just smiling and carrying on like his life isn't hanging in the balance right now. They called 126 potential jurors for questioning. Any extreme opinions for or against the death penalty would get a juror dismissed. It was all about balance. To be as impartial and open-minded, you had to be okay with him getting the death penalty or not, depending on the evidence. 6 potential jurors said that they wanted to see him put to death, and if they served on the jury, they would make sure it happened. Of course, they were dismissed. On the other hand, 2 other potential jurors said that they refused to consider the death penalty. They said they did not want to be responsible for another man's death, regardless of the crime he committed, and they were also excused. There's a picture of Kevin and one of his attorneys chatting on the day these potential jurors were being questioned. Finally, on February 19, 2010, a jury of 8 women and 4 men was seated and ready to hear from both sides. First, the opening statements from the prosecution began with a statement from Commonwealth's Attorney Ove. 3 living human beings on October 15, 2008, he said, standing in front of the pictures of the children. He continued, saying, "Lives worth living, but the evidence shows that this killer took that away." He pleaded with the jury to impose death on Kevin Dunlap, saying that these precious human beings, if ever the facts warranted the imposition of the death penalty, it was these facts. Then he highlighted what I told you happened on the scene that day, including testimony from Sean Laurie, who bravely went inside to try to rescue the children. All the neighbors that I told you about, Karen Walker, through tears, said that she was screaming that there were babies in there. This was an intense day for the jury. They also heard from EMTs, nurses, and doctors, everyone who tried to save Christy, Kayla, Courtney, and Ethan. This is what Kevin looked like that day as he listened. The next day was Christy's turn to bravely take the stand. She told the court everything I told you that she went through, including that final hug from her son, the tears that her daughter cried on that hardwood floor, and how she tried to be brave for them. She says she remembers it like it was yesterday, and I'm sure she will never forget it. She was overcome with sadness to the point that they had to take a break to let her regain her composure. Kevin would not give Christy eye contact, nor would he look at any of the other witnesses. The jury also heard from the medical examiner and the anthropologist. The prosecution also called detectives to showcase all the evidence that was collected, like this shoe found at Kevin's home that tested positive for blood, and the DNA from Christie's vaginal swab that matched Kevin's DNA. This was the evidence against Kevin. A female DNA profile collected from the left Reebok shoe matched Courtney Friendley, and it was estimated to be 1 in 12 quintillion, that's 1 followed by 18 zeros. A Crown Royal bottle wrapped in a small brown paper bag was collected from Kevin's garage. You remember how he had her sip out of a bottle of alcohol wrapped in a brown paper bag? The DNA matched Christy Friendly's. Swabs from boxer shorts at Kevin's house were consistent with a mixture of Kevin's and Christy's DNA. Inside the driver's seat of Kevin's vehicle, the seat belt had Christy's DNA on it. When it was the defense's turn, starting on February 23rd, they called 3 doctors to testify, including radiologist Dr. Eric Shields. He said that the mass of blood vessels was the size of a ping-pong ball and probably had been in Kevin's brain since he was born. This section of his brain showed no activity on a PET scan. Then neurologist Christopher King said that the odds of a person with this disorder is 1 in 100,000 or even 1 in a million. But when he was asked if he thought it would have affected Kevin's behavior, he said that he could not be sure. He didn't know, but it can definitely cause personality changes, memory issues, and even brain bleeds. The jury finally heard from Dr. Nicholas, who I mentioned earlier, the one who ordered the additional testing to begin with. He wanted to point out that this part of the frontal lobe is responsible for inhibitions. It's the portion of the brain that considers consequences. Antisocial behavior might not have been displayed when Kevin was in the service for the 10 years he was in the Army because it was so disciplined, but he couldn't say for certain if it did or did not cause him to commit these murders. He said that some people can still function normally and have right frontal lobe abnormalities. As a rebuttal witness, the prosecution called Dr. Amy Trivett, a psychiatrist from the Kentucky Correctional Psychiatric Center. She conducted the competency test on Kevin. She said the lesions were incidental and that nothing suggested they had any effect on his behavior. He knows the difference between right and wrong and can conform his behavior according to the law. Someone else was in that courtroom to testify. Kevin's own mother, the one he used to play nice with, the one he would act like a perfect husband in front of, Sheila Dunlap. She said she couldn't believe it when she heard that Kevin had been arrested for the killings. She said she was stunned and said, "I couldn't believe it because I know his heart and I know how much he loves children." She testified on behalf of her son. She told the jury he didn't have a normal childhood because he had a domineering father. However, she did mention some similarities in Kevin, like his father's need for the children to be perfect. He was very strict on him. In closing, the defense attorney argued to the jury that Kevin shouldn't be put to death. The death penalty wasn't the answer, that he had mental health issues, and they pleaded with the jury to think of Kevin's own children. His 7-year-old son wouldn't understand the death sentence of his father. Think of the effect the death penalty was going to have. He said, "Their father killed some children. Killing is wrong, and to show that killing is wrong, they kill him." Does that make sense to a 7-year-old? Some children, huh? They were more than some children. They were Kayla Williams, Courtney McBurney Friendly, and Ethan Friendly. Now it was in the jury's hands. 3 hours later, they were ready for their verdict to be read. Their recommendation, a death sentence for each of the children's killings and for each of their kidnappings. So 6 death penalties in total. Here is Christy when the verdict was being read. Army Major Doug Williams, Kayla's dad, said he wanted to say something to Kevin, and he would when he was sentenced. He told everyone that the most important thing in his life was missing now, and there was never going to be repayment. Nothing replaces the pain that Christy, he, and her stepmother and stepfather Jeff would have to endure from her being dead. Finally, the day was here, March 19, 2010, when Kevin was officially sentenced to death, in addition to 3 life sentences and 55 years for what he did to Christy. Judge Woodall said, "Given the severity of all the offenses, I'm imposing the maximum sentence allowed on all counts." Now for what Kayla's dad said to Kevin. He said, "You are nothing but a hollow shell of what was possibly once or should have been a man. However, you're not a man. Instead, you're a coward and a monster. You're nothing but pure evil that attacked helpless and innocent children and their mother. He went on to say that even though he's a Christian, he can't forgive Kevin. He wants Kevin to one day explain his actions and to confess to any other crimes he may have committed. Doug said that nothing brings him more pleasure than seeing Kevin sentenced for the crimes he committed, and the only regret he had was that he wasn't allowed to determine Kevin's punishment on his own and carry it out as his personal executor. Kevin sat there emotionless. Doug went on to say, "I still find it hard to understand how you can sit motionless, emotionless, and void of reaction, as the many photos and accounts of the aftermath of your crimes were described in great detail to this courtroom. It's clearly evident that you have no remorse for your crimes against my family and this society." Here's a picture of Christy with the prosecutor, who Christy referred to now as part of the family. Stephanie had an assumption about why she thought Kevin may have committed this crime. She said that she saw similarities between their family and Christy's family. For example, 3 children of similar age groups, and the fact that he could have possibly tried to become sexual with Stephanie's daughter, Bruck, in the past. Perhaps Kevin had a fantasy about that and found a family to carry out that fantasy, considering Christy had 2 young daughters. Remember what he said? "It's either going to be you or your daughter." Not to mention the fact that he seemed to want to harm his family, but perhaps if he had, it could have been too obvious that he was the perpetrator. Maybe he thought that he could get away with it, and he had this pseudo-family to carry out these heinous crimes upon. The fact that he lived in such close proximity to Christy's family also suggests that he could have seen Christy and her family before, and maybe he didn't like that they were seemingly happy while he was so unhappy in his situation. But we will never know. The judge remanded Kevin to the custody of the Kentucky Department of Corrections and said, "Good luck to you, sir." Kevin got an automatic appeal to the Supreme Court following his death sentence. It's actually mandatory in Kentucky. I read this long document submitted on August 15th, 2011. It was 173 pages. I'm going to spare you, but it is very interesting. I will paraphrase, just to let you know that the defense mentioned the fact that there were only 6 days before the trial when they got these additional scans done. The clinical psychologist, Dr. Nicholas, whom we already heard from, reviewed these results and believed that the lesion was very significant and would have impaired Kevin's capacity in terms of self-control and judgment. There was so much literature about the abnormal behavioral consequences of frontal lobe lesions. They just didn't have time to present them to the court because the judge refused to delay the trial so that they could prepare. There were all types of things shown in this report. Stuff about Kevin's personality, who he would have been, that he didn't even commit violent crimes in the past, and he didn't have a tendency to act out towards others. But according to doctors, he had a normal life. He was married, he held a job. In this appeal, there were pages and pages about his disorder and previous head injuries and traumas when he was in the Army. I'm not going to go into all the details, but they were just trying to prove that Kevin really didn't know what he was saying in court when he answered certain questions. To cut to the chase, the appeal was denied and the death penalty was upheld, so he stayed on death row in Eddyville, Kentucky. But this man's team will not quit. Just last year, they once again were filing motions for a new trial, saying that there was insufficient counsel and it was still ongoing. The last time I checked, they just want the death penalty overturned. Look at this man. He's 50 years old in this picture, and he is where he belongs. I want to end with Christy and her words. She said, "When you lose your kids, I don't think you ever heal emotionally. It's just something you never get over." But despite her grief, she wanted her story to be told because she hoped it would help others who may have gone through something like this. Maybe someone has lost a child or children, and this could help them. She knows her story is sad, but she survived because of how much she loved her children. She fought to stay alive for them. That is what kept her alive.